So hey everybody, how's it going? Thanks for stopping by again. For those who are new to the channel, this is our traditional weekly live stream. We do them every night, every week on Wednesdays, 8 p.m. Eastern. We'll go till about 10:30 or so, talking all sorts of things, talking politics, whatever questions you have. Usually we have a theme. Tonight is Iowa and going past Iowa for Bernie Sanders and for everybody else. So that's where I want to start. As you guys might notice differently for those who are here normally, Brianna, this is my beautiful wife, Brianna, is finally joining us on camera for the stream. That was our 10,000 subscriber promise. And as you guys know, the channel's been growing a little bit quicker lately. Brianna never thought this day would come because she didn't believe in me. She was like, one, I never thought you would get to 10,000 so fast. And then two, I never thought that you would, get to 10,000 period. So basically, Brianna's going to be joining us on camera. But she's going to still be primarily helping to moderate the participation between the chat and myself. Although if you have questions for Brianna, let her know, and she'd be happy to answer those as well. This makes it easier for her to participate because the microphone is right here. And of course, her being so much more beautiful than I am, it raises the attractiveness level of the stream.
You're being ridiculous right now.
I don't think I'm being ridiculous.
My questions aren't loading.
The questions aren't loading. Here, just load the stream again. Maybe close it up. So basically, just to give a quick recap, I did this last time. Before we get into questions, of course, we try to answer as many questions as we can, but we give priority to super chats. And usually we get through most of them. But it's if you want to support the channel, we're more than appreciative of that support. So, a couple nights ago, the Iowa Caucus happened, and normally we get the results the night of, even when it's really close. But despite that, we didn't get any results until the following day, and even still, Pete Buttigieg tried to claim victory. And the problem with the Iowa Caucus, in many ways, is that there's four different numbers. There's four different numbers to look at when you're determining who could plausibly be seen as the winner. So the first number is how many votes you got, period. All the people at the 1,700 caucus sites, who did they line up with first? And you add up those numbers. Bernie won that by a decent amount, by 3%. Then you add up the second count, which is all of the people after the allocations. So in a particular caucus site, if you finish below 15, you have a choice. Either go home or line up in another camp of people who were above 15. And then that's the second count. Bernie won that as well, but by a smaller margin over Pete Buttigieg. The third count is the statewide delegate equivalent, which is to basically say it's a stupid formula no one understands, including some of the people who calculated it, which basically determines the amount of people that go to the Iowa Democratic Convention to send to the National Convention, which is where the president or the nominee for president from the party is selected. And Pete Buttigieg leads that right now narrowly over Bernie because of the way his vote is distributed. And as somebody noted earlier on, because of the coin flips. There were a few places where Pete Buttigieg won coin flips. I kid you not. And that meant that he's got a delegate lead to some degree. And then finally, there's the number that really does matter most in my view, which is how many delegates you get to send to the actual national convention. And right now, despite the fact that Bernie leads a little bit in votes and Pete Buttigieg leads a little bit in state delegates, they're effectively tied in national delegates. And so why does all of this matter? Well, I think that tie effectively means that neither Pete nor Bernie won, at least right now, but that Pete Buttigieg is really, I think, acting inappropriately to just declare himself the victor without all of the vote in, given how close the results are. And I think that Bernie Sanders could still well be seen as the winner once all of those votes come in. And just before I hopped on stream, a report came out from Bernie Sanders' Iowa team saying that even though there's only 14% of the vote left to be counted, they're confident that in that 14%, which includes the satellite caucuses, where Bernie Sanders did very well, that they might have enough to actually catch Pete Buttigieg even on the categories that Buttigieg is leading. So stay tuned on that. But bigger than that, the story, besides the DNC's, shenanigans, some of which I think are definitely incompetence, some of which I think may even be a little malicious. That's a story, don't get me wrong. But at the end of the day, Pete Buttigieg and Bernie Sanders are both going to effectively come out of Iowa with the exact amount of delegates. And Bernie's going to go and he's going to win New Hampshire. But Joe Biden's in real trouble. And that's great news for Bernie. If you look at 538 right now, and 538 is not necessarily a pro-Bernie website, right? It's like a neoliberal haven. I know it's all data journalism, but there's a lot of neoliberal assumptions baked in. And they're saying that because of Biden's tank job in Iowa, that he's in real trouble. But Pete Buttigieg likely won't be able to fill much of that gap because Pete Buttigieg isn't well liked by young people and by minorities, right? Simple as that. So they're actually projecting that the rest of the early states, which like South Carolina, Nevada, New Hampshire, and the Super Tuesday states, which are like the first day where there's like a dozen states that all vote at the same time, Bernie Sanders is projected to win all but 2 of those. Bernie's not going to win South Carolina and Alabama, they say, but he's going to win all the other states. And that includes California and Texas, 2 of the most populous states in the country. So I think we have to be a little careful. Bernie Sanders deserves to have the accurate count in Iowa. There's a lot of shenanigans going on there. Delegates not being reported, delegates not being reported, people saying that the numbers that the precincts are reporting aren't being reported accurately in the statewide numbers. A lot of stuff is going wrong. The app, according to ProPublica, which is, a good source, basically they said it's certainly plausible that the app could have been hacked by somebody who had the intent and the skill to do so. It's not out of the realm of the possibility. And so all of that matters.
Do you really think they were hacked, though?
I'm not going to make a decision either way. I'm not. But I'm just saying, this credible source of tech journalism said it's possible. But we have to keep our eyes on the prize. Keep paying attention to Iowa. Keep paying attention to the shenanigans. Be they malice or be they incompetence, or maybe some both. But look ahead to the fact that if Joe Biden really is going down like he did in Iowa, then Bernie Sanders is in a great position. And I think that's what we have to push forward on. One other thing before we hop on to questions, I want to talk a little bit about the State of the Union. I'm not going to focus on it too much. One, Trump, profusely lied throughout the whole thing, as he often does. Basically saying that socialist healthcare, quote unquote, is bad. But of course, as Canadians know, our healthcare system isn't perfect, but the best parts of our healthcare system are the single payer, and the worst parts are like our Medicare, our medicine and dental system, which basically operate on the private insurance model, and those models suck, right? They're awful. Like Brianna and I have dental and pharmaceutical insurance, right? And Brianna, because she has, Brianna has a good plan through her workplace. Like, it's not a bad one. And even still, between having to save your receipts and is this particular medicine covered, and the dentist, did all the services you get at the dentist, are they covered? Did you go to the dentist too soon and you weren't covered because you went 5.5 months instead of 6 months apart? All of this stuff happens even to people with good insurance. And under the single payer part of our healthcare, you don't worry about that. So Trump's lying about how socialist medicine is bad. It's quite good, actually. But one of the things that really bothered me last night was how everyone was bending over backwards to praise Nancy Pelosi basically like, oh, she teared up Trump's speech. Oh, she stared at him in a way that was funny, maybe. But like, most crucially, she applauded for him multiple times, especially for the Latin American coup leader in Venezuela, Juan Guaido, who has been supported by neoliberals in Canada and the United States. Trudeau, Trump, Pelosi, they've all been behind him. And I think that shows just how important Bernie Sanders is. Because I'm not going to pretend that, like, there aren't differences between Pelosi and Trump. There are. Like sometimes I get cynical and I say, well, they're all the same. It's not true. But on certain questions, the neoliberal consensus is strong. And on like foreign policy in Latin America, it's one of those. And it shows you how Bernie Sanders is going to be different. And I think that's just an example. So if you guys have questions about the primaries, Iowa, New Hampshire, Super Tuesday, how it's going forward, Bernie Sanders looks really strong right now. Like, I know we're all a little bit like pissed, frankly, about how Iowa went down. Some of us might even be a little bit demoralized. But I think, keeping our eyes on the prize, Bernie Sanders finishing second here and Biden tanking is likely better for Bernie long term than Bernie winning a close result to Biden. It's almost better that Pete wins and Bernie finishes second if it means Biden's tanking.
Do we really believe that Pete's going to win this whole thing?
Well, yeah, yeah. And let us know, like, if you can hear Brianna, because she's closer to the mic, but I want to try to get that.
People are still calling for me to have my own mic, by the way.
Yeah, well, that's going to be especially my point is, like, Buttigieg's failures with non-whites, especially black people, combined with the fact that Bernie does decently with black people and does really well with Muslims and with Latino Americans, really speaks, I think, well to Bernie Sanders' ability beyond states like Iowa. So that's where I'm at. So we'll take some questions. I think we have a couple super chats.
Yes, we do. So Peach Lover Fi says, thank you for all your fantastic work on both American and Canadian politics.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the comment. Yeah, we try to cover both on this channel. With the American election right now, we've shifted a little bit more towards American, but I am still, going to do Canadian topics. And of course, we have lots of news happening in Canada. Trudeau's fake middle-class tax cut, the Conservative leadership race. If you have Canadian questions, happy to take those as well. I believe we have 235 people here, which I think is a record.
243.
That's got to be a record.
It's because I'm here.
Yeah, Brianna being here, how many people are sticking around because Brianna is here now?
Literally nobody. Okay. All my lettuce. I gave a super chat as well. 2 little coffees, and these streams make a late night. I know. I'm trying to go to bed too, but...
Thank you so much, all my lettuce. And I know I have some viewers from other parts of the world, from Europe and stuff, that sometimes stay up a little late for these, and I really appreciate that. I appreciate everyone coming, but, if people are burning the midnight oil to watch this live, I very much appreciate it.
And Bernie says that Brianna is his daughter's name.
Oh.
Which is pretty cool.
That's very cool. That's very small world.
Okay. Digital Rain asks, are you familiar with Mexico's 1988 election?
I heard a little bit about it. Like in the last day or so, but it's been so crazy I haven't had time to look at it. If you have any like specific comments, let us know. Maybe Brianna can read those out. I did hear something about the fact that it was what a lot of people consider to be like a rigged election, but I again, I don't know enough about it in that sense.
Okay, Pills Bandy Doughboy says, can you run us through the developments today? I heard they released more. And then the guy from one of the precincts said they were blatantly false. That's what
right? Basically, that's what I did, right? So, like, right now, some of the data was off. They were giving the numbers of votes were right, but then the delegates were off, or vice versa. In some cases, they were both wrong. In some cases, they were giving Bernie Sanders supporters to Deval Patrick. And I believe they gave Elizabeth Warren supporters to the wrong person as well in a couple isolated cases. So in some ways, this might not be fully like, a conspiracy against Bernie. It might just be general incompetence. But I think that, one of the narratives I thought about this, and I don't think this is a conspiracy theory, but I think that the Democratic Party knew that if they released part of the data, it made it look like Pete could win or was winning. And then Pete Buttigieg could get a media cycle as the winner. And then if Pete Buttigieg eventually does end up winning, then that's all fine and good. But if Bernie Sanders 2, 3, 4 days from now ends up being declared the winner, well, then everyone's going to not care about it because the media cycle's over. Rick Santorum, whatever you think of the guy, he sort of got like cheated out of a victory cycle back in 2012 because the initial count in Iowa gave Mitt Romney the win there. And he got a media cycle of being the winner. And it wasn't actually until after some more voting happened that they found out that Iowa actually was won by Rick Santorum. And so he sort of got cheated out of that time to be a winner. And winning Iowa is a big momentum boost. So, like, that's a factor here as well. Maybe they feel they can steal momentum from Bernie. I don't think that's a conspiracy.
Okay, I think you have to fix your mic a little bit because it's, like, in front of your face.
No.
Like, move it a little bit. Yeah.
Okay.
Something like that.
Sorry, guys.
Okay. And he says, is it almost certain that Pete will be declared winner in Iowa?
Right? Okay. Like, truthful answer, I have no earthly idea. Right now, if the data is accurate, that's a big if. Because, again, people are saying, like, Pills Bandy said, and I've been saying, and there's probably still people on Twitter reporting on this, saying that, like, the data at the local level isn't matching the statewide in some cases. You know, and sometimes Bernie's losing supporters or other people are, or if the data is accurate, it's likely that Buttigieg will end up winning the statewide delegates. It's likely that Bernie will win the popular vote. And it's likely that they'll end up tying on the most important thing, which is how many people they get to send to the convention later on this year, which I believe is in Milwaukee. So, like, that's where we're at. But Bernie Sanders and his people do seem to think that the remaining 14% could well be strong enough for Bernie to give him the win. And they specifically note satellite caucuses, which were not official caucus sites on their own, but they were linked to other ones. They haven't been counted yet. And a lot of those were where, like, Latino Iowans and Muslim Iowans and people who had to work late shifts, like at factories and stuff, they did their caucuses there. That's where Bernie Sanders got a ton of support. And so they're confident that when those numbers are added at the end, it could really help Bernie catch up. So mathematically right now, the New York Times says it's almost certainly Pete's going to win the primary, but I'm not 100% yet. And it should be noted that, you know, groups like the Associated Press and other news sites, when we do like elections, they'll declare like, oh, Bernie Sanders has won Michigan or Donald Trump has won Florida, even though they don't have all the information in because they understand based on trends. Here, no projections have been formally made by formal media organizations. So take that as a partial indicator.
Okay. I still think you need to adjust your mic a little bit.
Okay. Yeah.
Right, look in the camera. Because it's a little off.
Yeah.
Sorry, we're still kind of working.
On this new... Okay, wait. How's that? I think that might be better.
Okay. Sort of. I think it's still over a little bit, but it's fine. We're still kind of working on this setup. Okay. Kyle Lynch just says, I know it doesn't really matter, but among the remaining uncounted state delegates, how likely will Bernie be able to overtake Buttigieg?
Okay, again, with the data, if accurate, it's not likely. If the data is inaccurate, then we don't know. But Bernie and his people still feel they can do it.
Oh, people are saying we should move the camera. Oh, should I do it?
Okay, we could, maybe just move it a little bit over towards you.
I don't know if this is a good idea.
Just scooch it over. Okay.
Is that fine?
Yeah, maybe.
Did I get?
Yeah.
We should have worked on the setup a little bit more.
Well, it's okay. I think this is actually okay. I think I feel
no, I feel like it's not.
Babe, no, don't, because that's gonna.
Okay.
Okay, we got
Alright,
good height. It's
alright.
very finicky moving it this way.
Okay. Okay. Sorry, I'll repeat that. Kyle Chencha says, I know it doesn't really matter, but among the remaining uncounted state delegates, how likely will Bernie be able to overtake Buttigieg?
Yeah, it's not very likely if accurate, but it's I think it's going to be so close they're going to end up with the same amount of statewide national delegates. So I don't think that's the biggest issue. Then again, if the satellite caucuses really are good for Bernie, then all bets are off, and he could end up catching up.
Okay, we have a super chat from Queer Betch. He says, "How is Dimitri? What happened to your feed last week?"
Okay, so Dimitrios is good.
Baby's fine.
Baby's fine, but the stream last night, I don't know what caused it. Our internet was fine. YouTube seemed to be fine, but for whatever reason, OBS, the broadcasting software I use, just wasn't transmitting data. And I even tried it later that night, just on an unlisted private stream, just to see how it would preview, and it wasn't working. So I just think that it was some kind of random malfunction. So it's never happened before like that. We've had issues, but they're often related either to our own internet or to YouTube. So I think it was a freak accident. So we'll see if it happens again, but I'm not too concerned given that it was so random.
Okay, Soth Wen Soul says, so this is sort of electoral college posturing within a singular state. We should probably lean on this as a canary in a coal mine. If 2016 weren't enough, we need a landslide. Can't let up.
Yeah, that's a good point. Iowa even more than other states because of the whole reallocation and caucus system. Now, the other states sometimes have this as well, where you go, most primaries work the way election day does. You go in, you mark your ballot, you leave, right? That's how it works. And then they count the results once the polls close. They start announcing them. But how the delegates are allocated is proportional, but not always statewide proportionally. So generally the rule is within a particular jurisdiction, you need to hit 15% or you don't get counted within the allocation. So, in New Hampshire, I believe there are 2 districts, but then also statewide. So if you're strong either statewide or in a particular part of the state, you can get some delegates. If you don't have strength anywhere in particular or in general, you might not. There is a chance that because Bernie Sanders is polling so well in New Hampshire, that he could sweep most, if not all, of the delegates if no one else is above 15, either in general or in certain parts of the state. And so, that's really what we're looking at in that regard. This all means that the size of victory does matter. And that's a great point because, the Republicans use a winner-take-all model where you get all the delegates of the state, at least in most of the states. Even if you win by 1 vote or if you win by 100,000 votes, doesn't matter. So here, we really do have to understand that Bernie Sanders has to do really well in his strong states. This also means that in some of the states that are good for Joe Biden, a Bernie victory doesn't always have to be him beating Biden. It could be him getting close to Biden. For instance, there was a recent poll that had Bernie Sanders within 5 points of Joe Biden in South Carolina. Now, if that's the way it ends on election night and Bernie loses to Biden by 4 or 5 points in South Carolina, that's a win for Bernie. That's a win. Because when you look at delegate projections, Biden was projected to win way more delegates from South Carolina and Bernie way less. And so when it goes to convention, it's not just how many states do you win, it's did you perform well where you were expected to, and did you outperform where you were expected to do poorly or mediocre? And I think that's what matters. And so you're right. Every last vote does count. There's no wasted votes in the primary system unless you're supporting somebody who's well under 15%, in which case it might be time to consider switching to somebody more viable.
Okay, Joseph Man, I swear to God, I practiced this in my head. I'm so sorry, Joseph. The Zachary is here too, and I saw him came up. I saw him pop up, and I was like, oh no, what am I going to do? Okay. Joseph says, not related to the Iowa caucuses, but what do you say to those who criticize the Democrats and say impeachment was a waste of time?
Look, like, my view is that impeachment was the right thing to do. I mean, it was a sham. It was a travesty. But, like, based on what I understand of Trump, based on not just what he was formally impeached of, but, like, also other things he's done, I think the man deserved to be impeached. I really do believe that. Like, that's my view. And I think if I was, like, a Democratic congressman or senator, I would have publicly pushed for impeachment. Whether or not you think they handled it well, whether or not you think it was timed right, whether or not you think any of these sorts of political calculations, I think the man deserved to be impeached. Because sometimes it's about more than politics. And I do think they were right to do it. I do. And so I don't think it was a waste of time. I don't think so. I think it was the right thing to do. Trump should be removed from office. He is an impeachable president. Certainly more than Bill Clinton was. Certainly more than that. And I'm not a defender of Bill Clinton if you watch this channel. But the reality is that, yeah, Trump should have been removed. If the Republicans were not a bunch of ghouls, the man would no longer be president.
Okay, Glenn Atwell has a question. They say, is this what liberals meant to do when they promised electoral reform in Canada? So I'm not exactly sure what you're referring to, Glenn. If you want to rewrite your question and resubmit it, we'll try to read it again.
Yeah, no, for sure. I always love talking electoral reform. Yeah. I always love talking that.
Christo's favorite.
Yeah, I love talking that. So I want to get that question.
He wakes me up at night and he's like, "Hey, do you dream about electoral reform?" I'm like, "No."
Yeah. He's like,
okay.
Do you remember that time the liberals lied about electoral reform 5 years ago? Yeah.
Okay. Sergio Hernandez says, "Have you seen the Black Hawk County discrepancies? Definitely seems malicious."
Yeah, that was one of the, like, I wasn't referring to it specifically, but that was one of the posts I noted where the precinct cap, I don't know if that's the formal terminology, so excuse me if I'm off there, but like the precinct captain of that particular state or district in Iowa last night basically put something out on social media. I don't know if he was supposed to do this or not, but he was basically like in frustration. He was like, look, we're done. We have all the information. I've tried to report it. I've tried to get it out there, and they still won't release it to the public. Here's the numbers we have. And then when you look it up now, since it's been reported, the numbers are way off. And they're not just off for Bernie. Bernie and Warren, and I believe even Klobuchar, are all fairly significantly down in that particular calculation. And so whether it's malice or whether it's incompetence or whether it's both, it shows that like the results as they're posted right now are not only incomplete, but may well be inaccurate. Which is why I say, like, if the results are accurate, it's likely that Buttigieg will end the process with more state delegates and Bernie with the popular vote. But that's all based on the fact that we don't really have a sense of the data and any potential inaccuracies therein.
Okay, Sin Historia says, I have a Green Party leadership question. It looks like they basically wrote the rules to exclude Alex Tyrell without actually renaming themselves the No Alex Tyrell Party. What's your reaction?
Yeah, so this is a deep cut for people. So for those Americans, we have a 5-party system here in Canada at the federal level. And we have our Liberal Party, which is like the corporate Democrats, our Conservatives, which are like moderate Republicans. We have our NDP, which is like the party most like Bernie and AOC and the Squad. And then we have a Green Party, which is sort of like a party that doesn't know what it is yet, because it's very young and it's sort of small still, right? Doesn't get a lot of votes. And right now, the Green Party's leader that just decided to retire, and she's been leader for since the 2006,
Forever.
7, more than 10 years. But when she became leader of the party, had no seats, and now they have a few. She's decided to retire. And she's sort of what you would call like an eco-capitalist, right? If such a thing is possible. Basically, she's a Tory on a bike, but as the British will call Greens. And with her leaving, there's a sense that like the two visions of the Green Party are up for debate. And on the one side, you have her continuation, which is eco-capitalist, sort of centrist, certainly to the right of the NDP, our party, the Labour Party of Canada, if you will, but sometimes to the left of the Liberals, but not always. Or do they move into an eco-socialist direction? And you have somebody named Alex Tyrell, who's the leader of the Quebec Green Party right now, the provincial party, who wanted to run. But in essence, what the Green Party has done is they've mandated that to run, you need to pay a $50,000 entrance fee. That's not out of your personal money, but you have to fundraise $50,000 just to get on the ballot, which is actually more than the NDP charged when they did $30,000 back in 2017. And a lot of people are suggesting that for a party that's supposedly about grassroots direct activism and about being a progressive party, that this is an exclusionary process. And I tend to agree. I was actually somewhat critical of the NDP with the $30,000 limit, but the Green Party supposedly wanting to do politics differently, I think looks rather bad in having this limit. Now, for contextualization, the Conservatives in Canada are also having a leadership vote right now, and their minimum fundraising entry fee is $300,000, which is, of course, significantly higher than the Greens or the NDP. So you put the Greens in perspective, but I do think that Elizabeth May, despite the fact that she's retiring, has sort of moved out of that discussion, or sort of hasn't moved out of that discussion, and very much wants a leader in her ideological mold. And I don't think that's Alex Tyrell.
Okay, I actually don't think you know this question.
Okay, well, we're going to see.
Okay. Soth One Soul says, what's the longest duration for a 2006 primary state to finalize delegates? I believe I remember one with something on the span of months, and Bernie destroyed Clinton. Nevada, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know. I'm guessing that varies widely from state to state, maybe even from election to election. When is the convention in Milwaukee? I'm guessing at least a little bit of time before that, but I'm not sure. I'm really not sure. That's not something I can answer. Sorry about that.
People are suggesting a push-up contest.
Push-up contest?
No, not between you and I.
Oh.
To decide winners.
Oh, to decide winners. Yeah. Well, I mean, like, look, is that better than a coin flip? I mean, probably. At least there's a rationale.
The Almighty Huge says, wait, why do you have a Preston Manning book?
Why do you have a Preston Manning book? Oh, my father-in-law, Brianna's dad, gave it to me as a joke.
Yeah.
That's literally the story.
Okay. Gosh, there's so much commenting going on. Okay, people are angry about the rigging of the...
Yeah, like, look,
Bernie got cheated.
Is it rigged? Look, guys, I can't say 100% yes. But I can't... Dan
Corbyn declared himself president of Venezuela. Yeah, people are just declaring themselves.
Yeah, that's a great one. A lot of people were saying, like, look, guys, Bolivia got couped for less than this. Like, you want to talk electoral irregularities? Whether or not it's malicious? Excuse me. This is way worse than that.
Do you need water?
Yeah, I'm going to get some more.
All right, Travis Trainer says... did you watch Bernie's State of the Union? He does it every year.
Yeah, it was great.
What did you talk about?
I mean, sorry.
Good thing we're already married.
Yeah. My eyes are, I don't know what's happening here. I was rigging my body. But, no, Bernie's speech was great. It was a sort of a mixture of a response to Trump, his lies, his misconceptions about healthcare and progressive policy. But in general, it was sort of mixed in as an election speech as well, right? Where Bernie Sanders talked about his priorities. So it was a good speech. It was a good speech.
Okay, we have a question from the Zachary.
Yeah. The Zachary.
Are you okay?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm
I
good.
need to take over? No. The Brianna show can start. Okay. He says it's important to talk about how Bernie did win the popular vote in Iowa. Did you talk about that?
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a great point. I think at the end of the day,
someone called me your mom. Stop coughing on me.
Look, sorry.
What's your problem?
Well, I can't cough into the microphone. No. So basically, and I noted that in my video earlier today on the channel, so check that out after the stream, where I said that, look, if they end up tied in delegates especially, but even if they aren't, a better indicator of support going forward is popular vote, especially the first ballot, because in regular primaries, you don't get to make a second choice. Whether or not you think you should be able to, you don't, right? And so, in some ways, Bernie getting clearly the first place support was a better indicator of him going forward in this process. And I think that's something we got to keep pushing. In New Hampshire, you're not going to get that support mixed in. You're not going to get to the people below 15%. They don't get to reallocate their delegates. They don't get to do that. Those votes just get thrown out effectively. It's only the votes for people above 15 that count. And I think that's going to bode well for Bernie Sanders in a lot of these states.
Okay, pool party toast. Jay said, Christo, did you hear that in the third week of the Canadian federal election campaign, the NDP raised the most out of any federal party? And that was the week that Singh won the debate. Yeah,
that doesn't surprise me. Singh was very strong in that week. He got a lot of media attention because of the debate. If you recall, the day up it was the day of the debate, or maybe even the day before, where he went to the market in Montreal, and that man basically told him that he would look more like a Canadian if he took his turban off. For those who don't know, the leader of the party that Brianna and I are members of, the New Democratic Party of Canada, our leader is Jagmeet Singh. Jagmeet Singh is the first non-Christian leader, second non-Christian leader of a federal party after David Lewis, who was the first Jewish leader. But he's also like the first leader to be non-white in Canada of a major federal party. And he's the first one to have like an openly religious symbol because he wears his turban, right? And so in some cases, he's been asked by people like, oh, if you took that off, people would like you more. And he was like, well, in Canada, you can dress how you like. That's what makes Canada great. And it blew up and it went international. And I think that helped drive a lot of fundraising. I think that's that. So it doesn't surprise me that week was particularly good. Just one sec. I'm just go.
Where are you going?
I'm just gonna
God, it's a good thing we have life insurance.
Okay. I just needed to get up and cough that out. Okay. I'm back.
Good God.
I don't know what's happened.
I come on and you're falling apart. Okay, Just Me says, I keep hearing Bernie has lawyers regarding Iowa's results, but can't find anything to confirm that. Do you know if it's true? When Bernie reported his numbers, it showed that they were comfortable. It showed a comfortable lead. I trust that.
Yeah, I mean, one thing to keep in mind with Bernie's numbers, and I'm not saying Bernie was wrong or even that Iowa is wrong right now. I think more accurately, the Iowa numbers are more likely to be wrong. But I think it is possible that Bernie Sanders was only reporting 60% of the numbers, and that maybe that wasn't representative. Bernie doesn't have to be lying or wrong to have that happen. He might just not have had a representative sample. That's possible. Or it could be that because of the remaining delegates, those are stronger for Bernie than the ones that have been counted, and maybe it'll end up being right. So I don't want to make comments there. I haven't heard anything official about lawyers. I haven't heard about that. I know Bernie Sanders and his people have looked through their numbers and the remaining ones, and they still feel confident. More than that, I'm not sure. And maybe they're looking through their numbers to find discrepancies, if and where they exist, and how relevant they would be to the final result. But in terms of like numbers like that, I'm not sure. I mean, the person that was making the biggest deal about the numbers actually was never Bernie. It was Joe Biden. Because if you recall that night, nobody was getting results, and everyone was probably frustrated. Not just Bernie, not just Pete, but everyone. But from the things we were seeing, it was clear Joe Biden was tanking, right? He was losing to Andrew Yang in certain precincts, and I'm not trying to take a shot at Yang there. I'm just saying, like, Yang is not, like, he doesn't have a lot of support, especially in a state like Iowa. Like, he's not, you know what I mean? And so even in college campuses, Biden should be beating Yang. And when he wasn't, it really told me, like, Biden's in trouble. And so I think Biden tried to basically say the results should not be released until they can be fully inspected and stuff. And I thought that was Biden attempting to bury his failure of Iowa. Because again, that's the bigger story. Bernie Sanders and Pete Buttigieg effectively tying, that's not that surprising. That's not that surprising. And that's not bad news for Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders finishing a strong second here is not bad news. It's not great news, but it's not bad news. It's not going to hurt Bernie. Joe Biden's performance in Iowa could be disastrous for him. And I think that's who was most interested in getting out the lawyers potentially.
Okay, YBN says, are people looking into the connections between the Iowa Democratic Party officials and the Buttigieg and Biden campaigns?
Yeah, I've seen some of that, and there are certainly like media figures and other like YouTubers who have looked into that. I haven't looked into it enough to make like definitive comments like about that, but in general, it should be said that the app was designed by this company. The app is called Shadow, I believe, or the company is called Shadow. That's an awful name to give an app that you want to be seen as transparent and above board, right? It's like, look, we have our brand new election app. It's called Espionage, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like, oh man, it's like we call it interference, you know? But like at the end of the day, the CEO of that company was a Buttigieg supporter. Like, and you could see it on Twitter. And like Buttigieg's campaign, and I believe Biden's as well, had like money involved in it. And even if there is no shenanigans there, even if, right? Because no one's directly proven that like this app was designed to help Pete Buttigieg win the primary. Like, we don't have proof of that. But the optics are so bad. And this is why in politics, this is why even in like the municipal level, here where we live in Southern Ontario, basically like whenever like an issue comes up at city council, the councillors have to basically come up and say, I have a pecuniary interest here. Put another way, like the decision made here, I could make money or lose money based on the decision. I'm a landlord, and this policy would make it easier for landlords to, rent out extra rooms. And so I could stand to make money. Ergo, I should declare that. And Pete Buttigieg, there wasn't enough made publicly about this whole issue. And I think that's really troubling. And it shows that Pete Buttigieg lacked some character, frankly, or his team did. They should have said, look, we've given money to this app. Maybe you should find another tool to do this because of perceived bias or conflict, even if it isn't real.
Okay, Lisa Hildebrand has a super chat, and she is coming with the tea. She says, Christo, I was sleuthing last week at an NDP event. I asked some MLAs if Rachel Notley is going to rebrand and start a new party. The room got silent, and the MLAs got very hostile. I reckon I touched a nerve. I love sleuthing. Is that true?
Well, Lisa, I believe...
I am shocked.
Yeah. Okay. So Lisa is an activist of the NDP in Alberta, and the way it works, like in the United States, there are provincial and federal versions of the parties, but they don't always match up ideologically or in terms of policy, right? Given the different priorities and ideologies of the provinces and states, right? So why the California Democratic Party is more left-wing than the Texas Democratic Party, even though they have the same name. And so there have been rumors of conflict between the federal NDP and the Alberta NDP, because the Alberta NDP supports tar sand pipelines. The federal NDP doesn't really, and so that's caused a bit of consternation. In terms of Lisa's specific claim that they're planning on doing that, I can't speak to that. I guess you could read it two ways, Lisa. It could be that maybe they are planning to do that and they don't like people talking about it, or it could mean that they find that question like absurd and they don't want any unnecessary drama being created, so they're off put by that. I can't say either way. Certainly there were conflicts between the federal party and the provincial party, but those have sort of quieted down over since Rachel Notley did endorse the NDP and with Heather McPherson playing a role in Jagmeet Singh's caucus. The only non-conservative MP from Alberta is an NDP MP. I don't think that's happening, that they're going to fully rebrand. I don't think so. At least not right now. Well, but maybe I'm wrong.
Rebrand and start a new party.
Look, yeah. Well, like the argument whether it was, they're going to call themselves the Alberta Progressive Party or something. That might be to sever ties to the NDP. Like that's the rumor. But I haven't heard much about that.
Wow. That's crazy. Lisa, keep us updated.
Yeah, like certainly. Like I'm not saying you're wrong, Lisa, but I'm saying like
clearly something's going on.
Yeah, and like I haven't heard in my circles this happening, and I do have some other folks from Alberta that I keep in touch with, and I haven't mentioned anything like that. Although maybe you're the first one onto this very important news. So thank you for the comment, and thank you for the donation. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Okay, Zachary says, which leadership election is most important right now, the Green Party, Cons, or the OLP?
Probably the Conservatives. I mean, the green one matters because
the green one matters because they're so much their leader.
Yeah, exactly. So Brandon makes a great point there. So they all matter for different reasons, of course. I would say the Conservative one matters most, but the green one matters because the leaders in Canadian parties matter so much, right? But for the Green Party especially, like Elizabeth May for a long time was the Green Party, like literally everywhere. Besides her, very few people could even name another Green Party figure, right? Even now, most people in Canada could probably only name her and not any, like maybe they can name Andrew Weaver, but the Green Party leader in BC, maybe, but probably not. And so with her gone, the literal direction of the party in a fundamental way, more than usual, is at stake. So it's important, but the party is still small, right? The party is still ultimately a party of two or three MPs. Like that has to be taken into account, that it's effectively still not really a party at the federal level. And so that has to be taken into account. The OLP, the Ontario Liberal leadership race, is important. Some polls, although I'm skeptical of these polls, show that the Liberals could go back to government after 4 years of Ford. I'm skeptical about those polls because of the... I'm skeptical because last year when they did some polling, the Liberals did poll very well with a generic leader. Just like the Liberal Party with leader TBD, right? To be determined, did well. But then when they plugged in people like Michael Coteau, Stephen Del Duca, Mitzi Hunter, their numbers collapsed back into the low 20s, high teens. And Andrea Horwath and the NDP benefited. So the Ontario Liberal leader pick is important, given that they do have the potential to come back, but they still are ultimately the third party. Conservative leadership is obviously the most important. They're the official opposition right now. That party won the popular vote in the election. The leader of that party can be seen as the prime minister in waiting. The one thing you could say that maybe makes it a little less important is that from my perspective, that most of the top people aren't running, and it might end up being a bit of a walk in the park for Peter MacKay. I don't think that you can guarantee he's going to win, but I saw some polling of Conservatives a couple couple nights ago on Twitter that had him at about 47-48% support or something, and no one else above 10. So, and some of the other people being polled aren't even running. So, I think things look pretty steady there for McKay. So maybe the leadership race isn't as important because maybe there's not much to fight over. Maybe McKay's just gonna end up winning it. Although I wouldn't necessarily count out Aaron O'Toole. He probably has a shot.
He came in third last time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Aaron O'Toole came in third last time. Scheer was first, and now he's gone. And Maxime Bernier was second, and he's still with his PPC. So he does have a chance.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Zachary says, I think it's more important that Joe Biden is now losing his electability myth than winning outright.
Yep.
That's a good observation.
Yeah, no, Zachary, you're right. And we touched on that earlier, and I noted that in my video. But I would say, like, if you told me there's two scenarios coming out of Iowa. Scenario one, Bernie Sanders wins Iowa by a few points. Joe Biden in a strong second, though. I'd be like, okay, that's good. Fine, I'll take that. Scenario two is Bernie and Buttigieg effectively tie. And maybe Buttigieg is narratively declared the winner. So Bernie Sanders is effectively like a 1A, 1B scenario. But Biden finishes fourth, maybe even fifth. If Klobuchar, I think he's going to be fourth, but Klobuchar was fairly close to him. And like he's in a distant fourth. I would take that second scenario because it's more important to tear down Biden than it is for Bernie Sanders to win this particular vote. Because again, delegates, like the amount of delegates in Iowa doesn't really matter all that much. Iowa in total, the whole state, has 41 delegates they send to the national convention. You need something like, find the right number. You need like almost like 2,000 delegates to win on the first ballot. And so getting 11 versus 9 versus 12 delegates is functionally irrelevant compared to the big states to come. But Biden being seen as, flailing, his campaign failing, all of this has a measurable value to Bernie. Has a measurable value. People forget this sometimes. People forget that Bernie Sanders has a good chunk of Biden voters go to Bernie after him, right? Like enough that if Biden tanking, it's not like they all go to neoliberals. There are people who vote Biden and then Bernie. And if Biden collapses, Bernie gets those people.
Okay, Jesse Aguirre says, what do you think about Republicans voting to acquit Trump?
Yeah, I mean, it's, again, they shouldn't, because objectively, Trump should be impeached. If the process worked based on, like, the romantic notion of, like, because the way it was designed was the House is like the rabble, right? That's why they only get elected every 2 years. It's very partisan because everyone's always fighting because they're always in fight or flight mode because it's election always at the House. The whole point was you're going to send it to the Senate where they're elected to 6-year terms and they're the best and brightest and they'll deliberate and they'll be as truthful as they can be. And of course that was all BS. This was a hyper partisan process, top to bottom. I think it was only Mitt Romney that voted against Trump, and it has to be remembered that Romney sort of already has his legacy. So what are you going to do to him? It's not like he's a young guy who has to worry about taking care of his kids. Romney's a rich guy. He can insulate himself from consequences. And also, in terms of how this affects you politically, Trump is extremely popular with Republicans, but not so much in Iowa. They vote for him, but like not out of a sense of loyalty, almost out of a sense of like begrudging acceptance that they're a Republican state. So Mitt Romney isn't necessarily going to be hurt by voting for impeachment, unlike some other Republicans who would almost certainly be primaried if they did. And so I think that's a major factor. And I think, as I've noted on this channel, and as the Vox, what do you think of Vox? But they did a really good video about this a couple years ago now, or when this whole impeachment process started, and they compared the Nixon impeachment to the Trump impeachment. And basically what they argued was that the media has allowed, the modern media, for better or for worse, has more echo chambers. Back in the 70s, there were 3 nightly news channels. There was no 24-hour cable news. And they were all broadly, like, ideologically center-right, centrist type news sources. CBS, NBC, ABC, whatever. Those are like the 3 newses. And when those newses just reported the facts about what Nixon did or what Nixon asked people to do or whatever, people were pissed. And regular Americans from both parties wrote to their congressmen, wrote to their senators, basically saying, like, the president should be impeached. Nowadays, if you look at it, objectively, Trump should be impeached. A majority of Americans think he should be removed from office. But he's popular with more than 90% of Republicans because the way that people consume media. If you watch Fox News, if you read Breitbart, if you watch the alt-right YouTubers, on the other side of the YouTube political spectrum, you won't hear this impeachment story told the accurate way. And those people ultimately have a lot of sway. And impeachment doesn't happen unless the party affected by it at the grassroots level wants to see it happen. Because no congressman, no congressman and no senator wants to stick their, stick out to oppose Trump, given that their constituents, the Republican constituents, love Trump. They love him.
Okay. All My Lettuce says, can you please show us Smokey? Today has been very stressful.
Well, he's
in
just...
luck.
Yeah.
Because he is right here.
Yeah, we got this. So Smokey's right here. Everyone, this is our cat, Smokey. He's, very cuddly, very friendly. He's been on streams before, so it's good to see him again. Mm-hmm. Some nights he's on, some nights he isn't, so he might just be here for a little bit, but...
Yeah, he has nowhere to sit except on me, and I'm not going to hold him.
Yeah.
Okay, Keo Ravana says, what's your favorite book?
I'm not sure. It's a good question. I mean, I don't do a lot of, fiction reading and, a lot of pleasure reading because I do most of my reading through, my academic work and stuff. In terms of, book that's been really influential, I mean, that's a good question. You know what? Honestly, I have to think about that one. I don't want to just give a cliched answer. When I was a kid, books, I really liked the Chronicles of Narnia book. Those were, ones I really liked. But, I mean, I don't know. I have to really think about it. Is there a book that I really think of as my favorite? I don't know if I do have that. It's a good question, though.
People are funny.
Well,
I don't know. Apparently people can't hear me. So I'll try to talk. No, don't move the mic. I'll try to talk louder.
Okay.
Okay, sorry. Joseph Mangano says, what do you make of Warren's third place finish in the caucuses? Do you think she's a bad finish? Do you think she's a bad finish away from dropping out in New Hampshire?
I mean, I do think Iowa was a good result for Warren, all things considered. Third place, which is good because you might have thought she'd finish fourth behind Bernie, Biden, and Buttigieg. And I think she broke 20, or she's around there. So it's a good result for her. She's going to get some delegates. She could spin that as a good result. New Hampshire is going to be really telling. I think Bernie's going to win New Hampshire, maybe quite comfortably. So I think if Warren finishes third, she's going to be in real trouble. If she can finish second, she might be able to continue. I don't know. For Warren, it's going to depend on fundraising and her ability to keep the lights on in a campaign. If she can't do that, she might have to drop out. And I think that, South Carolina is not going to be a good one for her. I don't think Nevada is going to be either. And so I feel like she needs to get at least second place in New Hampshire if she wants to have any real shot. Now, maybe she continues until Super Tuesday, but I kind of hope that, she drops out, because especially when Biden was strong, the reality was that Warren's delegates were just going to really harm Bernie's ability to beat Joe Biden. And even still, Warren winning delegates, and she will win delegates in this race, will make it harder for Bernie Sanders to have an outright win, which could bring in the super delegates and all of those, shenanigans at the convention. Whereas if Warren ends up dropping out, say, after the first 3 or 4 states, then Bernie Sanders will mop up a lot of her support. Under most of the polls I've seen, Warren's people don't all go to Bernie, but a big chunk do, more than anybody else. So Warren dropping out would benefit Bernie most of all.
Okay, Jesse Aguirre says, do you think Trump's acquittal will affect Bernie's chances?
No. I don't think so. I mean, Trump's approval ratings have risen over the last few weeks, but I don't know if that has anything to do with impeachment. I don't think so. I think impeachment has been a wash in terms of public opinion. It could just be the economy. The economy remains, at least in certain narrative ways, strong. So I think that's what's happening. I don't think the impeachment failing or succeeding helps any particular Democrat. I don't know. I mean, hypothetically, you could say, Trump's been acquitted. Some people on the fence will come back to Trump. I don't know. I don't really think so. I think this is one of those things where, like, very few people were like, okay, if Trump gets acquitted, I'll vote for him. I don't know. I feel like people were locked into their choices on that one. That's my view.
Okay, Matthew Ingersoll. He says, Christo, recently on the Michael Brooks show, David Grissom discussed pushback on the Bernie presidency, particularly a capital strike as one of the worst effects. Can you speak on the topic?
Yeah, so one of the arguments, and we actually saw a mini version of this in Ontario, the province we live in, here in Canada, Canada's biggest province, sort of like our California, back in like the early 1990s, where the NDP, the left-wing party, won a government. And there were some indications that there wasn't as much a capital strike, but the interest rates were hiked specifically on Ontario to sort of starve the government in a way that wasn't purely based on metrics, but was sort of based on the fact that the banks wanted to make the government squirm, if you will. I mean, that's possible. But, I don't know if that'll necessarily happen, right? I mean, will capital try to maximize its profits and try to maximize its power? Yeah, certainly. So if Bernie does raise taxes, they'll try to avoid their taxes. But if we're talking about a coordinated attempt at capital flight as a protest of Bernie Sanders in particular, aka it's not about his policies, we as the 1% are going to launch a capital strike as a protest against Bernie. I don't know if we'll see that as much. I'm not sure, but you might see, as Bernie Sanders does raise taxes on the rich and wealthy and well-connected, you might see those people try to push back. And we have to be ready for that. We have to be ready. I mean, I'm a labor activist, but like when we created public Medicare here in Canada for the first time in Saskatchewan, the back when the NDP was called the CCF, the Cooperative Commonwealth Federation, the greatest Canadian ever, Tommy Douglas, came out and basically busted the doctors' strike. The doctors all went on strike to protest single payer, and they busted that strike. It's the only strike I ever wanted to see busted.
What are you talking about?
When the Tommy Douglas busted the doctor strike to bring in healthcare in Saskatchewan.
Oh.
Yeah. And so you might see protests from the rich and wealthy and well-connected. But that'll just underline who Bernie Sanders fights with and who he's fighting for.
What do you think about what do you really think about the NDP splitting off in Alberta?
I don't like it. Like there's some disagreements there, but there's still a lot of commonalities. There's still a lot of shared activists. There's still like the Alberta NDP, for despite the fact that they were far too centrist for my liking, was the first and now still the only province to inaugurate a $15 minimum wage.
Well, Alexander Watt has said the Alberta NDP rebranding would be pointless. Some people would see a different party name but still see the same politicians.
And that's a great point. If it's like, unless they found like the way they could do it hypothetically is if they got together with like the Alberta Party and the Alberta Liberals, and those parties barely exist anymore, and they formed like the United Progressive Party. The UPP versus the UCP, and they actually would find other parties to merge with. Maybe then they could get away with it by saying technically we've merged with liberals and other people. But Brianna's right. If they just branded themselves the Alberta Progressive Party or whatever, and then changed their color or changed their logo, you're right that maybe it would. First of all, if I would lived in Alberta, I would stop supporting them. If they did that, I would, because I'm an NDP guy. I wouldn't tolerate that. And if there was no NDP to vote for, I just wouldn't vote, or I would vote for the local Marxist-Leninist or whatever.
Go register a non-vote.
Yeah, I would register a non-vote. So they would lose people like me, and I'm guessing I wouldn't be the only one. And people who don't like the NDP would just see them as the NDP. So I don't know what benefit they see from that.
What do you think the odds are that Harper comes back to run?
Very small. Very small. Harper is playing a notable role. Harper, for those who... the former Prime Minister of Canada, was Prime Minister from about 2006 until 2015. Basically, he was Prime Minister until Justin Trudeau became Prime Minister, and then stepped down as Conservative leader, but has sort of been playing a big role in the leadership contest. He's not supported anyone publicly, but he's basically come out to oppose certain people running, like Jean Charest, who was the former leader of the Progressive Conservatives in Canada, and a former Quebec Liberal premier, which is very interesting. But basically Harper was gonna take him on. So I think that Stephen Harper is still playing a big role in the party, more than a lot of retired leaders often do, but I don't think he's gonna run. I think maybe if he thought no one he liked was running, he would run. But my indication is that one of the reasons Peter MacKay is getting so few people running against him is that maybe Stephen Harper has expressed behind closed doors that he likes Peter MacKay. And maybe people felt that, I'm not going to waste a leadership run on this side. That's why you saw Pierre Poilievre, whatever you guys think of him. He's one of the, he's like one of the worst MPs. Like just an awful person with awful ideologies. But a lot of people were excited in the Conservative Party about him running. He's a young guy, energetic. People thought, this guy could be the next leader. And he was going to maybe run. He had built a campaign team, basically. Had some big names on it. And then he comes out, he's like, actually, I'm not running.
And so, that was strange.
Yeah, and so I think behind the scenes, most of the powers that be are lining up behind Peter MacKay right now.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, Jay says, Christo, do you think the ONDP can pick up a seat in the Ontario provincial by-elections coming up?
Yeah, I do. Well, not in both. Not in Orléans, but in Ottawa, Vanier, I do think it's a possibility. There's a few reasons. One, both Liberal MPPs sort of abandoned their constituents for greener pastures. One left to basically go get a cushy job at the U of T, and one left to go run for the federal Liberals because she wanted to be, she didn't want to be on the backbenches anymore. And I think that the narrative has to be that these were two Francophone-dominated parts of the country, of the province, and Doug Ford has been hostile to the rights and privileges of Francophones. And in their time of need, these two MPs abandoned their minority community. And I think that the NDP has the opportunity to say that the Liberal Party, they only represent you when they can be in cabinet to give themselves and their friends, patronage appointments and things like that. And I think also, Ottawa Vanier, we ran a great candidate last time in the provincial election, Lyra Evans. Who don't know, she's a fantastic young woman. ran a good campaign, but she did not speak French in a riding that has a significant French population, right? That's an issue. That's an issue. And the candidate we have there is a francophone part of the community, and I think that riding is winnable. And in by-elections, like provincial narratives are less important. Like the fact that that's like a safe liberal seat means less in a by-election than it does in a general election. And the parties, the Liberal Party, Ontario Liberal Party, despite the fact that they are polling well, they don't have a lot of money, they don't have a lot of resources. The Ontario NDP, more than they usually do because of the official party status, has a ton of money and a ton of resources. And I think that that's going to be a factor. And you might also see the Joel Harden effect play out, where Joel Harden built a team of hundreds of volunteers in Ottawa Centre, and maybe some of those people could be mobilized to do that work in Ottawa Vanier. I think you could see a victory there for the Ontario NDP. Orléans is probably very safely Liberal. I don't think that one's going to flip.
Baron Saturday says AOC is great. A few more years, maybe president.
Maybe. I mean, like, let's hope. She needs, first of all, like, and I think this is a stupid rule, guys, but like, she literally can't be president or vice president now because I think you need to be 35. That's stupid. You should be able to be president at 18. Like, as long as you get, like, because like, if you can vote, you should be able to run for every office. But my rant aside, I think she needs a little bit more time in the Congress. Maybe she should eye a Senate run if a seat opens up in New York. But I think that in general, yeah, she could well be like the next Bernie Sanders style candidate for the Democrats. I really do believe that. 4 years from now, 8 years from now.
I don't think a one-term anything should be.
Yeah. But, it also depends, too, because Bernie Sanders has said if he becomes president, and guys, Bernie is going to win, right? I noted this. Like, a lot of us are a little bit ticked off with the Iowa thing, but 538 is saying that Bernie Sanders is going to win, like, almost all of the early states, except for South Carolina and Alabama. Right now, given that Biden's tanking. But things are looking great for Bernie. And so, when Bernie becomes president, Bernie has said AOC, she would be welcome to come work in his administration. So AOC may be a cabinet minister. What do you guys, secretaries, you guys call them. And so that could give her an accelerated profile if she gets an important position and then does a good job. So it could set her up for a presidential run earlier than she would normally have, just being a congresswoman from a deep blue seat in New York.
Okay, Alibi says, what party will win in the next Ontario election?
I say it's the Ontario NDP. The polling right now indicates that it's the Liberals, but I don't believe that. The Liberals, when you poll with a particular leader in mind, the Liberal support goes down. Because everyone right now is reading into that. I think Andrea Horwath is going to be the next premier of Ontario. I really do believe that. I'm a partisan as all out, but I really do believe that.
Okay, the Zacharias says, Christo, I've been seeing Stephen Del Duca ads, and he's basically saying that we need better, but remember, we can't have nice things.
Basically, yeah, and that's why I think Del Duca is going to flame out. Del Duca is like the male version of Kathleen Wynne. Like Hunter and Coteau, he was in that Liberal government, but he was, Coteau and Hunter weren't like main players with Kathleen Wynne. So at least hypothetically, like, and they're younger, so they could sort of like say like, look, yeah, I was part of that, but I didn't agree with everything Kathleen Wynne did, and I'm my own person. Maybe people would believe them, but Del Duca's got like the Kathleen Wynne, Dalton McGuinty stench all over him. And he's going to probably run a more centrist campaign, and I think that might actually win some conservative voters, but maybe not as many NDP voters. And that could lead to an interesting result. And again, there was polling last year that showed Del Duca-led Liberals getting below 20%. So I think that Del Duca winning is likely the best option to ensure a left-wing victory by the NDP. Now, right now we don't know for sure because the liberal convention hasn't happened yet, but Del Duca does have an edge in terms of like initial delegate support. I do think Del Duca is going to be the next Ontario Liberal leader. That's my view.
What do you think of Romney actually voting for impeachment?
I think it's interesting. I think it's the right thing to do. I'm not going to like give all my praise to Mitt Romney because Mitt Romney's done some awful things. Mitt Romney picked Paul Ryan as his VP pick, and Paul Ryan reveled in the deeply unequal tax cuts. Mitt Romney was like the corporations are people type person. So I'm not going to praise Mitt Romney for doing the right thing here because he did what was expected of him. He saw a criminal president, and he said that criminal president shouldn't be president anymore. But I think it was the right thing. And I think on the one hand, he's isolated from the consequences in a way that a lot of other Republican senators weren't. One, Romney just got elected to the Senate in 2018, meaning that he wouldn't be up for re-election for another 4 more years, right? Like he's still got a lot of time before his next election. So he's insulated there. And again, Utah is a deeply conservative state in a lot of ways, but they're not really, the Mormons do not love Trump like the evangelicals do. And so Mitt Romney might not be hurting himself in a way that, say, like a Republican from like Indiana would, right? It's not the same.
People are saying Smokey is fluffy.
He is very fluffy.
Okay.
Do we ever consider naming him Fluffy? Well, actually, we adopted him from a previous family. He was already named Smokey, which makes sense actually because the way his fur has a smoky color to it. But Fluffy would also have been a good name.
Okay, we talked about this a little bit, but Ace says, what are your thoughts of the State of the Union? Trump's statements felt pretty strategic for the upcoming election. Definitely attacked socialism and a lot of lies, probably a response to Bernie.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I didn't really touch on that too much. I think we touched on the lies, we touched on the Guaido cheering from the Democrats and Republicans, but I do think that, this is confirmation that the Republicans do realize that more and more Bernie Sanders is becoming the front runner of the Democratic nomination. Whether that's because he's rising in the polls or whether that's because, at the end of the day, Joe Biden being weaker likely makes Bernie Sanders the front runner. Trump is getting nervous about Bernie Sanders. And I think that the State of the Union sort of hinted that he's going to attack that. But a lot of people say, well, aren't you concerned that Bernie Sanders will be attacked for being a socialist? And I'm not really, because they attack every Democrat for being a socialist. Even the ones, Hillary Clinton was called a socialist. Barack Obama was called a socialist. I'm sure that Bill Clinton by some Republicans was called a socialist. Even though he was like the most neoliberal president, or right up there with like Reagan, right? Like, I'm sure they were called socialists.
Okay. Zachary says, do you think that the Tories and GOP is electorally precarious because so much of its base is working class, and they can switch to Bernie?
I mean, to a certain degree, right? I think that's probably, it's not really, the Trump vote is interesting. In terms of income, Trump didn't win low and lower middle income people. Clinton still won those people, but by less than Democrats often do. There is a chance that Bernie Sanders could win those sort of Trump-Obama swing voters. The people who voted for Obama in either 2008 or 2012, but didn't in 2016, they voted for Trump. Whatever the reason. But at the end of the day, Bernie Sanders' real strength is mobilization of the people that didn't even vote in 2016. Whether it's young people or marginalized people, or maybe people that didn't like Trump, but they didn't like Clinton, so they didn't bother voting. And whether or not you want to judge them or not for that, this is not the time to have that debate. They didn't vote because they weren't inspired. Because whether you liked Obama or not, whether you saw through his neoliberalism or not, at the end of the day, Obama inspired people. And Clinton lost for a bunch of reasons. Some of them were clearly her fault. Her bad policies. She didn't campaign in Michigan and Wisconsin enough, etc. Some of it was due to voter disenfranchisement of African Americans. Some of it was, this affected her less, but, gerrymandering and all those sorts of things. But the biggest factor was she couldn't get them to Pokemon Go to the polls, right? Bernie Sanders will drive turnout, and that's where I think the Republicans are scared of Bernie Sanders. That's my view. Bernie is going to get massive turnout.
Okay, we have a super chat from JF Loves Michael Jackson. No question, but thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Support.
Thank you. Really appreciate that. Thank you.
And Digital Rain has a super chat as well.
Bernicillin cures gonorrhea.
Oh.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. That's good. That's clever. Thank you so much. I also appreciate joke super chats. That's great. I like that. Or Burnto Pismol. Pepto-Bismol. I don't know. Okay. I'm gonna leave the jokes to Digital Rain.
Let's leave the jokes to someone else.
Yeah.
Okay, Craig Adolph says, I saw something on Twitter today about Warren canceling flights and ads in South Carolina for later this month. If that's true, she might be preparing to wind down her campaign.
That could be true, Craig. I don't know. Can she save money? Like, that's a question. I don't know if you have the answer. Hypothetically, there's a couple things. Craig could be right that if she is canceling things like that, she's maybe not going to run. And maybe she's looking to exit out before South Carolina. Maybe, though, she can get, maybe you only, lose a deposit or something. And maybe Warren is like, okay, look, I'm going to bomb in South Carolina. I'm going to finish below 15, almost guaranteed. So whether I get 7 or 4 or 3 in South Carolina, I'm going to get 0 delegates in that state. So I'm going to cancel all my spending in South Carolina, and I'm going to shift that to Nevada, or I'm going to shift that to Super Tuesday states where I have a chance. Maybe that's her thing. I'm not sure. Like for instance, these are our strategy. Bernie put a lot of resources into Iowa. Don't get me wrong. But as a percentage of campaigns, Pete Buttigieg likely invested the most. Pete Buttigieg, even if I'm still not convinced he has a shot to win the nomination, but if he did, it required a very strong Iowa. Bernie and Biden are big enough names with big enough national polling leads and things like that they could absorb 1 or 2 bad results. There's no margin of error for Pete Buttigieg. And so, if you look, people have strategized. Michael Bloomberg has not invested almost anything in the first 2 or 3 states. He's put all of his investments into the Super Tuesday states. For instance.
Okay, did you ever set up a Discord?
I have a Slack for my patrons. I have to look into setting up a Discord. One thing is that, it would be good to have a Discord, but I have set up something that I do offer to my patrons as a reward. One of the things I do on this channel, which is actually fairly unique among most YouTubers, is I don't gate any of my content. So on this channel, at the very least, I don't have special videos and streams only for my patrons or what have you, or for people who, donate money to the channel. So one of the things I do have is a Slack chat where people can ask questions. We can just chat about things. I can ask them questions, things like that. And so if I set up a Discord, that sort of conflicts with that. So maybe what I'll do if I do set up a Discord is I would have to find something else to offer the patrons at that level that they would find, similarly valuable. So that's something I have to look into. Because I do think it would be cool to have a Discord, and the channel's large enough now that maybe a few hundred people would join it, and it would be good to have that kind of space. But I'd have to find something that my patrons at that level would agree with, because, they've invested, some of them have been patrons for a long time, right? So I would want to find something that respects them as well.
Okay, we have a super chat from Robin Hood. They say, America seems ready to elect Bernie. Why isn't Canada ready to elect a progressive, i.e. the NDP? That is a good question.
There's a lot of good questions there. One, we do have to remember, to be clear, that like Bernie Sanders has a subset of support of a party. So a party that has about half the support of the country, Bernie Sanders has about a quarter of that support. So a quarter of a half is about 12.5%. Bernie Sanders, the NDP, has about 18% support, 19% support, if you look at most of the national polls right now. So Bernie Sanders has about the same level of actual support as the NDP. Now, the way their party system works is different, but effectively, we have to understand that. Bernie Sanders does not command the first place support of more than the NDP does, if you look at it in that sense. There are other factors, though. One, our first-past-the-post system privileges the two major parties, and so the NDP, despite the fact that over half of Canadians would consider voting NDP, in the last election, about as many people that would consider voting Liberal would consider voting NDP. They voted Liberal. And some polling indicated that as many as 43% of Liberal voters were motivated, at least in part, by strategic voting in that most recent election. 43%. Now, it didn't mean they were totally motivated by strategy, but at least partially motivated by strategy. And so that hurt the NDP as well. Other factors include that Canada did not go through the same intensity of economic crisis that the United States did. The financial crisis in Canada was bad. I don't want to sugarcoat it. I don't want to have this romanticism about how Canada wasn't hurt by the crisis. Anybody who landed on the job market in those years knew that it was a crisis in Canada too. But the crisis wasn't as uniquely devastating as it was in the United States. And so the response has been like less of a backlash against the banks and those sorts of institutions. Canadians, I bet if you asked them, wouldn't necessarily be big fans of the banks in terms of like bank fees and all of that BS, because we get ripped off just like Americans do. But if Canadians were asked, do you have confidence in like the banking system? Canadians would be much more likely to say yes. And I think that's a big factor. Another factor, to be fair, is that the NDP has been too timid on policy. On some issues, the NDP is equally or more progressive than Bernie, but on others, we're not. Bernie pushes not only for, like Jagmeet Singh wanted to cancel all student loan interest. It's a good policy, but it's not good enough. The NDP membership, and Brianna and I were at that convention. Yeah. I'm sure at least some of the 208 people here were as well, where we unanimously voted as a party to support free post-secondary education for all Canadians, free university and college. And that wasn't added to the platform. But Bernie has that, and Bernie has the cancellation of all student debt. You know what I mean? Like, the NDP had pharmacare and dental care. We had good stuff there. But, like, at the end of the day, like, Bernie Sanders was bolder in certain areas. Mm-hmm. And I think another factor has to be put forward is that more, like, Singh started to do this, but didn't do it as consistently and early enough, embrace the language of class struggle and things like that. And like, which side are you on? Bernie's like, I'm on the side of working people. Whereas Singh took a more optimistic tone, like hope and optimism type thing, and really shifted towards that more, like, frankly and correctly aggressive tone during the election. And I mean, Singh ran the election for the most part in the right way, but it wasn't enough time, right? And another factor, there are other historical factors. Quebec most of the time votes Liberal, or Bloc. It was only a couple elections where that wasn't the case. And so, ironic as it is, the most progressive province in Canada has almost always voted in a manner to make an NDP government impossible. And in this particular election, it played a role. Our leader is not a white man, and our leader is not a person with a religious identity that you can sort of hide. I don't want to downplay the fact that Bernie Sanders is Jewish, because I guarantee you there will be Americans that will not vote for Bernie Sanders because of his ethno-religious identity. I guarantee you. But it's different if you have a different skin color and your name doesn't sound English and you wear a religious symbol like ubiquitously. And so all of those played a factor. But yeah, the NDP has to own up to the fact that another factor is the NDP hasn't found a way to tap into like politicizing fundraising. Like the conservatives in Canada have done that, right? Where every time like the government like does something they don't like, they send out hate emails to their base and saying Justin Trudeau wants to rip up Canadian flags and give Omar Khadr the millions of dollars and blah 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 blah, and like, don't you hate that? Send us $14 or something, right? Or whatever. But the NDP has not politicized like fundraising small donors as a statement. We haven't done that. That's a big failure on our end.
Okay, Christine Park says Warren won't endorse Bernie. How can she after making all of that trouble?
I mean, I hope she comes around and does endorse Bernie. I honestly believe that before this debacle, I really believe this, that if it would have come down to it, because earlier, remember, before Bernie came back from his heart condition and like the squad's endorsement, Warren was passing Bernie. Warren was passing him in the national numbers and in some of the early state numbers. I believe Bernie Sanders would 100% have endorsed Elizabeth Warren if he had to drop out for health reasons or because it wasn't going well. Warren should do the same. She should. Will she? I don't know. But she 100% should.
Okay, I missed a super chat. Super Bros 15 says, after the apps, will the primaries be rigged too? Thank you so much for your support. We really appreciate it. And great question.
Yes, thank you so much. Look, apparently they were also going to use the same app in Nevada, which is another caucus state, but apparently that's not happening anymore. I'm more confident in the fact that, like, I mean, if this is rigged, and look, guys, I can't 100% say that. Look, I can't. Like, as a Bernie supporter, as somebody who understands just how much the powers that be don't like Bernie Sanders, of course, I can understand that maybe there's a chance that could happen. But I have no proof yet, so I can't say that. But is it more likely that in a traditional voting process, there's the Democratic Party's incompetence will be less likely to affect things? Then yes. Only a few of the states use caucuses that use this sort of system. And most of them just use the standard vote. And I'm more confident that it'll be straightforward when it comes to New Hampshire and most of the other states. I'm not worried about that. And it seems like the fact here that like maybe they tried to slow the results because they didn't want to give Bernie the win and those sorts of things. But like, I'm not sure. Like, let me just look this up. Caucus results to see if there's any new information. Like right now, it seems really close. 92% in right now. And Bernie is within 20 delegates right now, 20 statewide delegates. So Bernie has closed the gap, it looks like, which is very interesting. So Bernie's closed the gap a little bit. In any case, it's looking like a tie. But I think that it's certainly going to be more straightforward in the traditional votes. I'm not worried about that.
Okay, Zachary says, do you think people should join the Democratic Socialist Party of Canada?
The Democratic Socialist Party of Canada?
Democratic Socialists of Canada, sorry. The DSC.
Is that like, is it a party? Because I would say no. You should vote for the NDP everywhere in Canada. I'm sorry to my eco-socialist friends in BC. I'm not ready to jump on that board yet. The only exception to voting NDP in Canada, there's only one, is in Quebec, provincially. We should not vote for the NDP Quebec. You should vote for Quebec Solidaire. Everywhere else, I don't care if you're living PEI, you could vote for the Greens. I vote NDP everywhere. If I lived in an NDP riding where the NDP did the worst in the country, they would get my vote. Now, if you want to join a DSA-style organization that's trying to influence the NDP, then I would say go for it. Like, if you want to do what the DSA is doing in the States, which is effectively helping socialists primary corporate Democrats and electing socialists to municipal and statewide and national levels, then by all means, go ahead. whether it's Courage or whether it's like a DSA type group. But I wouldn't support a new political party at this stage. It's no. Look, everyone complains about the NDP, guys, and not without reason. Not without reason. I've talked about it on this channel. Like, foreign policy, the lack of ambition on our domestic policy, even though on both fronts we're still the best party in Canada. But, like, everyone says, where's our Bernie? Where's our Bernie? But it's like, look, Jagmeet Singh beat Nikki Ashton in the leadership race by like 30,000 votes. If the left wanted a Bernie Sanders and they felt that Nikki could be that person, they just needed to get 30,000 Canadians. That's not that many people. All over the country. It's not from one part of the country. To pay for $5 memberships to the NDP and vote for her. If they can't do that, then the question is, why don't we have a Bernie Sanders? Why is it the NDP's fault? It's because the people in the country aren't willing to get the work done to make a Bernie. And if it's like, well, Nikki's not the Bernie Sanders either, well, then it's like, well, then maybe it's not the NDP's fault. Maybe it's the wider left's fault. Like, why is the labor movement supporting the Liberal Party? Right? For instance, or much of the labor movement. You know what I mean? Well, you know, the Canadian Labor Congress, which
the Canadian Labor Congress does not officially
support.
support.
They do not officially support the Liberals. Yes, you're right.
Okay,
yes.
So let's just be careful.
Brianna's just because Brianna is from one of the grand unions of Canada. Brianna's a member of the United Steelworkers, one of the best unions in the country today and in the past. But my point is that, like, if you want to create a Bernie Sanders in Canada, like, taking over the NDP is possible. And even, look, Singh has not moved left enough, far enough, fast enough, but he has moved. Right? He has moved. And that campaign was a good campaign relative to what we saw from Mulcair and even Jack Layton.
Okay, Lisa Hildebrandt says, Christo, rank and file just tweeted, co-op at Winnipeg's St. Vital Shopping Center is out of gas. Surprisingly, I saw a lot of support for unions last Friday when I was protesting Red Deer, Alberta co-op. You know what I heard?
What?
I heard that yellow vesters are walking the owners of the co-op across the picket line.
Yeah, so basically right now, there's a strike at a refinery in Saskatchewan by Unifor. Unifor is one of Canada's largest unions. It's the largest private sector union in the country and like the second largest union overall, I think. And it left the Canadian Labor Congress. I blame Unifor primarily because they were raiding and stuff, but they've been getting a lot of solidarity from people for this strike, and it's a very interesting one because technically the employer is a cooperative, but they've basically transformed into like a traditional big business. But it's sort of like cooperatives versus labor, which is like a tricky position for like the left in Canada historically. But what we've been seeing is like most of the people seem to be lining up in support of the workers, but geographics have played a really interesting role because the employer has tried to argue that like the strike is being driven by evil Canadians from Ontario and Quebec, and the real Canadian Westerners don't support the strike.
Why are you looking at me? What are you saying? I'm not
we're like the evil Ontarian elites that are driving this anti-Western strike. And so in Canada, we have yellow vesters, but they're not the cool, badass yellow vesters from France that are like taking on dirty cops, right? And like taking on Macron. These are like, they're just basically alt-right people who wear the yellow vests. And so some of them are basically bragging about how they're trying to break the strike. Some of them also, they're sort of connected to the United We Roll movement that are basically driving through the picket line or threatening to drive pickup trucks and 18-wheelers through strikers, basically ending their lives. That's what's happening. So it's a pretty ugly moment out there. But one of the positives is that despite the fact that there's been a lot of fights in the labor movement over the past couple years between Unifor and many of the other large unions in Canada, because Unifor was basically raiding them, this was like a moment of solidarity between all the unions. So it's been good to see.
The co-op is not a worker cooperative.
No, it's not a worker cooperative, but it's a consumer cooperative, right? And so in the Canadian left tradition, like the cooperative movement, the labor movement, before they became bourgeoisified, the farmers movement was essential to like the growth of the left in Canada. Because the thing about Canada is it was always more rural and agricultural than Britain, Australia, New Zealand, and the United States as a percentage. And so there was never enough concentrated like trade unionists to form a pure labor party like you saw in Britain. And so the farmers movement and the consumer cooperatives movement and farmers that formed like grain cooperatives and stuff was essential to the growth of the left in Canada. But a lot of those cooperatives effectively became like massive businesses that exploit their workers as if they were, private corporations.
Yeah. Okay, the Almighty Huge says, where would you put Kathleen Wynne's government on the political spectrum? And we have some people signing off, so good night, guys. Thank you. We're going to keep going for a little while.
Yeah, we're probably
But thank you for joining us.
We're probably going to go till about 10:30. So that'll be good. But if people want to see this after, I unlist the streams for algorithmic reasons. But if you save the link, or if you got a notification, you'll see it. And if you ever want to watch a stream and you missed one, send me a note on social media. You'll see it. It's also, I posted about it on Twitter, so you should see the link if you want to finish this up later on.
Do you need the question again?
No, the Kathleen Wynne government. I mean, look, it was definitely a right of center government. I still believe that, but it was a center-right government. It was probably more to the center-left than the previous McGuinty government. On social issues like certain educational reforms, she was quite progressive, at least in a moderate sense. There were some labor reforms that were good, including the raising of the minimum wage. But she also ignored a lot of the key demands from workers as well. In fact, I would say she ignored the majority of the most important demands around making it easier for workers to form unions and have those unions have effective access to collective bargaining. And also she did some objectively right-wing things. She privatized hydro. She attacked the fundamental charter rights, the basic constitutional rights of workers to bargain collectively and strike. And of course, in the final gasps of the Kathleen Wynne regime, she chose not to attack Doug Ford, but to suggest that Andrea Horwath would be just as dangerous, or if not more dangerous, to the province than Doug Ford, helping to hand Doug Ford his government. That's her legacy. So Kathleen Wynne's legacy isn't actually what she accomplished or didn't accomplish. Kathleen Wynne's legacy, and I'm a historian, so maybe I'll have a role in telling that. Kathleen Wynne's legacy is everything Doug Ford's doing right now. Everything Doug Ford's doing right now, thank Kathleen Wynne for it. It's all her.
Okay, Terry Gibson says, what's the NDP policy on first past the post voting?
It sucks. We want to get rid of it, at least federally, right? Like that's what it is, right? So the NDP has a clear position, which is that first past the post is bad because it distorts the will of the electorate and all those sorts of things. But first past the post needs to be replaced by a proportional system. So we don't support ranked ballot. We want mixed member proportional. I've explained it in videos on the channel and maybe on other streams, but the basic way it works is you keep the riding system, which is that like everybody still gets like a member of parliament, basically a congressman or a congresswoman that they go to, and that's their person that they can go to for local issues. But you create regional seats that are allocated based on the proportion of votes gotten in the region. And the regions would be large enough that they could act proportionally. And the way this system works is it preserves local representation while adding a regional representation, which is more people that you can be represented by, but also balances out distortions in the House. It's not necessarily perfect one-to-one representation, because regional discrepancies will still exist. But in general, it should mean that parties that get around 20% of the vote should get around 20% of the seats. There would be a threshold, but it would be likely around 5% what the NDP would support, meaning that if a party couldn't get 5%, it wouldn't get access to allocation of delegates or of MPs. But this would be good for some of the smaller parties as well, giving them a voice. The Green Party and the NDP under this system would likely have quite a few more seats. the conservatives likely about where they are right now, and the liberals less because of this. Quite a bit less liberals.
Okay, Zachary says, do you think that there should be mandatory voting, having an election day holiday, serving food, and combining that with MMP?
I mean, some of those things certainly. Making voting mandatory is tricky, right? Because, one, there's the question of, and this could be challenged, like, could you make the case that, like, forcing someone to vote is effectively the government telling you to make a political choice? Now, I don't necessarily agree, but if the argument that the act of voting in and of itself is political, then the government can't enforce political values on its people. Right? Like that, it's a charter right. And so you could make the case that mandatory voting violates the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Now, could you do other things like that? Mandating, and some cities have done this. Kingston, Ontario does this, and other cities in Ontario do this, where they have free buses. The buses are free on election day. Right? So that helps people get to the polls. A mandatory election holiday would be a good idea. I like that idea. Or maybe, like, I don't know if this would help turnout or lower it, but like voting on weekends. I don't know, like some European countries do that.
What about keeping your tax receipt?
Keeping
your tax refund until you vote?
Maybe, but that could be seen as, somebody could make the argument that that's too much of a stick, that it would effectively be like punishing you for not voting, which would be a charter violation. I don't know. I think it's hard. And then we have to also add in the wrinkle that our colonial government telling Indigenous people that they must, by law, by threat of financial or maybe even criminal punishment, participate and legitimize our colonial system is not necessarily a bridge I'm comfortable crossing. So if you say like, oh, everybody but Indigenous people are mandated, well, then you get into some hairy positions because indigeneity is not strictly enforced totally through the Indian Act. So I don't think you're going to be able to pass mandatory voting in Canada very well, but I do think we need to find ways to make it easier. I think, for instance, they should have polls in every high school. Every high school should have a poll in it. And children should be given time out of class. All 18-year-olds should be given a free couple hours on given a half day of school or something to go and vote specifically. You get to take the afternoon off if you go vote. I don't know if would be a violating thing, but getting kids to vote would be good. I don't know. Maybe that's just me.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Cheesy Burrito says, do you think that Biden is done the way some people are making it out to be after his Iowa performance?
I mean, I can't say for sure, but a lot of the indications are that he's in a lot of trouble because the result was well below expectations. And so you wonder, was the Iowa polling of Biden wrong, or is all polling of Biden overestimating him? And it also hurts him narratively. So if you look right now, 538, that the polling estimate site has shown him taking quite a big hit. And so for them, it's like Iowa, what's the Iowa narrative? For the very small candidates, it doesn't matter. Like Yang, Gabbard, Deval Patrick, all of these sorts of people, they're effectively not running, right? Like no offense to the Yang gang and to the Gabbard group. I don't know if that's what they call them. You guys, the Gabbard people should call themselves the Gabbard group. Okay. But like they're done regardless. The narrative doesn't matter there. For Klobuchar, it's likely a good night. I don't think she's going to win, but she did okay. She's probably happy she was close to Biden. Warren, I think, actually beat her expectations a little bit. Buttigieg has to be happy, given that he's either going to win or be very close. And I think Bernie actually has to be a little happy too, because Bernie Sanders did pretty well, and is either winning or is tied for the win in effect. Biden's the only one of the major candidates that really took a bad narrative here. And I do think it's going to hurt him. I do. Now, is it over? Not certain. Not definitely. And if you look at the projections you're seeing from from 538, they still project that Biden, besides Bernie, is the second most likely to win. But what they project now is that it's more likely that there will be a a non-majority on the first round than Biden winning. Bernie Sanders is the favorite, followed by no majority, then Biden.
Okay, apparently in Australia, you just have to show up and get your name checked off. So essentially, it's like registering a non-vote.
And I get that, so I understand that, and that would be one argument in favor. But again, if forcing someone to go to an Elections Canada or Elections Ontario station to do an act mandated by the government, is that government forcing political action? If it is, it likely would be considered a charter violation. I'm not saying I agree. I support
registering a non-vote is like forcing non-political action.
Well, I get it. I'm just saying, look, if for me, I would implement mandatory voting. The only concern I have is the colonial effects of it. Some indigenous people choose not to participate and legitimize our colonial process, and I can't judge them for that. I can disagree with them, but I can't judge them.
Okay, Fame Us says, can we dive into the NDP erasing the will of its membership at convention a little more? Why don't you just explain how not everything makes it into the policy book?
So, like, this is not a unique NDP thing, right? This is not every party does this, and right-wing parties do it too. Like, if you read some of the things conservative members pass, you'd in a sense be glad, I guess, that conservative governments don't implement them. There's a lot there. But basically, when you go to a party convention, there's usually two sorts of things you do. You might select a new political leader, or you'll pass policies. And sometimes it'll be like the party wants to support a basic income, or the party wants to cut taxes, or the party wants to ensure that every child has access to dental care, or whatever. And then all the people there will vote on it. And then if it passes, it becomes official party policy. But the party's policy book is not 100% correlated to what the party runs on as a platform. And that applies to all political parties. And I think what happens sometimes from every party is that some of the policies supported by the base, for whatever reason, are not seen as politically or materially viable and get thrown to the wayside. Now, sometimes maybe that makes sense politically. A party could pass a policy that is objectively unpopular. The conservative membership, for instance, could say, wanted to ban the Conservative Party rank and file, wanted to ban birthright citizenship in Canada, which is to say, Canada and the U.S. are fairly unique in the world, where if you're born here, it doesn't matter if your parents were citizens or if your parents were here with legal status or without. If you're born on Canadian soil or American soil, you are a citizen. In the U.S., that's a constitutional guarantee, right? It's an amendment to the Constitution. You'd have to amend the Constitution to get rid of it. In Canada, that's just a law that can be changed with one vote in Parliament. But the Conservatives didn't run on that policy in this election because they realized it's political, it would be disastrous for them. And so that was an example. And so from our perspective, we're like, thank God our Conservatives ignore their members. Well, the NDP ignores its members sometimes too. And they were wrong to do it on the particular policy, which was to make all university free. Now, in some cases, maybe the party, I think that policy is a winner. But at the Ontario NDP convention, Brianna and I were also there at the year before, the NDP passed a policy to make university free, and then an amendment was put forward to ensure for all students, including international students. International students are often pay, not only do they pay tuition, they pay a higher tuition than Canadians.
Because they don't pay taxes.
Because they don't pay taxes and all this. Whether you agree with it or not, there's a rationale there. And some people disagreed with that, and some people in the room agreed with it. I think that if the party ran on free university, they would be reluctant to put that part of the policy in. Even though the membership wanted it, I can almost guarantee you, if you polled the province, you would find people might be supportive of post-secondary education being free, or at least there'd be a lot of people that support it. But a majority of people would not support funding foreign students with Canadian taxpayer dollars.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I have no issue with it necessarily, but most people would.
Okay, we have 2 super chats. So one from Monica G. Thank you so much for your support. And they say Gabbard Group is nicer than Tulsels or Tulstans.
Yeah. So, yeah, do they call themselves Tulsels? Because a cell is basically like, like incel, like the involuntary celibates. Those are like the some of the alt-right, a splinter of the alt-right in a limited sense. They're like the sort of men that like
you gotta fix your mic again.
Basically think like that we're involuntarily celibate, and it's rooted in this really ugly like anti-woman like discourse. And then stands, I know it's like stand from the Eminem song, like we stand someone, but I think of it as like a country, like I am from the land of Tulstan, like a mythical like a Middle Eastern country that you find in a movie because they don't want to name a real country. So Gabbard Group, I like Gabbard Group way more than either of those, certainly.
Okay. I need that screen back. Okay, so Digital Rain, thank you so much for your support. Another super chat.
Thank you so much.
They say to force people to vote is to fix the wrong problem. Instead, make every vote count with proportional representation. End worst past the post. End regional alienation with representation for everyone.
Yeah, Digital Rain makes a couple good points there, and thank you so much.
Wrong.
No, that's one of the key instances. In my video on why proportional representation is good, I made a lot of arguments, but one of the ones was regionality. One of the problems in Canada is that some of our provinces are almost entirely represented by one political party, and some of our other provinces are almost represented by others. So the Saskatchewan has all their Congress people, all their MPs are from one political party in the entire province. And then there are other provinces that are almost entirely liberal, right? And the result is that if you're a conservative in Quebec, or if you're a liberal or an NDP or whatever in Alberta, or green in Alberta, you effectively have no voice. But with a proportional system, it would mean that while places like Alberta and Saskatchewan would certainly have more conservatives in Parliament than not, they wouldn't entirely control an area. Because if you can get 50% support in a province, or 40% or 45%, you could win every seat in the province, depending on how your vote splits in a multi-party system. But it's not the case that everybody in Saskatchewan's a conservative, right? A majority of people in Saskatchewan aren't conservatives, but they still got all the seats, right? Smokey's causing a bit of a tantrum over here if you guys hear him knocking stuff over. But basically, that would help with regionality. And I do agree, it's not going to solve all the issues, but I have seen some studies indicate that proportional systems do a whole bunch of great stuff. More women are elected, younger people are elected, and turnout is generally higher. Maybe not a whole lot higher, but higher nonetheless. Because people feel their choices matter. Right? Like right now, I'm not ever going to tell somebody their vote is meaningless. But if like here in the town I live in, like it's an NDP versus liberal race. You know, voting for another party here, you're not really going to win ever. And there are other communities where the NDP might get 7 or 8%. Or the Conservatives get 65% of the vote in one riding. And the next party doesn't even get a third of that. Mm-hmm. You don't want to tell someone their vote is meaningless, but their vote could well be meaningless. Even if they vote Conservative. If your riding is 70% for one party, then your vote, even if you vote for that party, likely means nothing. But under a proportional system, you could tell somebody that, look, in almost any scenario, your vote has some kind of proportional meaning. Your vote is that one little fleck of salt that gets your party to the next proportional seat. I can't promise it'll mean the difference, but I can promise that it'll have a chance to mean a difference, unlike the first past the post system in many ridings.
Okay, we have a super chat from Fame Us, and they say, agree to disagree, but thanks for answering. That's nice.
Yeah, thank you. No,
That's a good message.
We don't have to agree on everything here. And like, look, most of my viewers are, they're left-leaning people, NDPers in Canada, Bernie supporters in the States. But we have conservatives here. Sometimes they come to troll and to flame and things like that, but often they come to have interesting discussions. And I'm happy to see that, whether it's on a core issue or whether it's just on a random issue, that we can have just a nice discussion. So thank you so much for that.
Have there been any polls on what Canadians think of socialism?
There was an interesting poll that came out last year. I can't actually remember the numbers.
And that was from Sean Patterson.
Sean, thanks for the question. I did a video on this. I can't remember what I said in the video about the numbers specifically. But if you look up like poll or socialism on my channel, if you do a search for it, you might see it. It's from last year, maybe during or before the federal election.
Someone said September.
September, maybe. So one, the quality is going to be lower. So it's probably before I got this new microphone. So mind the quality. But what it said was that a majority of Canadians had a positive view of socialism. But the exact same percentage of Canadians had a positive view of capitalism too. Which leads me to believe that Canadians don't really know what either capitalism or socialism is. It was literally the same. It was like 50-some% of Canadians like socialism and 23 don't. And like 50-some% of Canadians like capitalism and like 23 don't. It was literally identical. Canadians' views on socialism and capitalism are identical, at least according to that poll. Because I think what's happening is they're reading in like the idealized version, right? And the idealized version of capitalism is like competition, free markets. Capitalism is associated for a lot of people just directly with democracy. Like, it wasn't socialism versus capitalism in the Cold War. It was capitalism versus dictatorship. That was the argument, right? Like, capitalism was democracy. Whatever, like, and we know that's not true, but like that's what that was the narrative. And for socialism, a lot of people, when they say socialism, they think hospitals, roads, firefighters, any kind of redistribution, any kind of social program, right? That's socialism. But I think that's like why both terms are seen positively by most people, because they hear the positive versions. And Thought Slime, I don't know if anybody watches Thought Slime, but they do political content, but it's not newsy like mine. He does like more conceptual videos than I do, more scripted, more artistic than my videos. And he made a great point when he said that, like, look, let's be real. It's like real talk from leftists to leftists. When you say that socialism is polling really well, what they mean is Bernie Sanders, the way he speaks about socialism, is polling really well. Which is to say, social programs, taxing the rich, things like that. When you want to poll and you ask people directly, we want to, through either revolutionary or political means, defeat the bourgeoisie and replace them with a worker government, less people are going to like that. Now, some elements of socialism are popular. In the States and in some parts of Canada, I bet if you polled, more companies should be owned directly by the workers themselves who work there. That might poll well. That's socialism in a sense, but you're not actually asking people the function. Or if it's like, if you polled people and said, it's good when capitalists disregard everything except for profit, including workers' rights, the environment, and all of those sorts of things, people would not say yes to that either.
Okay. It's really uncomfortable to sit here.
Yeah, I know.
Really uncomfortable.
I need to like...
We need an upgrade.
We do. Well, maybe we'll get like chairs or something.
I'm too much of a princess for this. Okay.
Is our camera a little...
I don't know.
Oh.
No, don't do that.
Wait, there we go.
Don't.
There we go.
No,
Wait.
that's too much.
Okay, there. Sorry, I was a little tilted, guys. Sorry. This is great though. Again, like we had probably had a record here for the number of people at this stream, and even still, like it's slowing down a little bit. But we don't normally stay around 170 this late into a stream. This is great. I'm really happy to see everybody here.
Yes. Okay. Zachary says, do you think that the caucus system should be abolished because it's anti-worker since it requires people to take time off, transit, and potentially see their employer at a caucus? That's a good question.
Yeah, I'm torn on it. As a political nerd, I love the caucus system. I love like the it's fun to watch and see it happen and all the numbers flying. But I do agree. I agree that like it sort of is in some ways incompatible with the secret ballot principle. It is inaccessible. It's not a process that's easy to understand or transparent for voters or people who are watching. So I would say in general, that's a model that should go away. Yeah, I do. Despite the fact that I see like why it existed historically, and I could see the hypothetical value, but at the end of the day, I think the on the whole, the traditional voting model is like the best way to do it. That's my view. And certainly, I mean, if you were going to do caucuses, if you could like, I mean, maybe you could like, if you like the idea of reallocation, that you could do ranked ballot if you wanted to. But I agree, that's a great point. That like, what if your boss like, you know, doesn't want you voting Bernie Sanders? Under a primary system, you can say whatever you want to your boss, but like when you're in that ballot booth, you can vote as you want. A caucus system, that's not necessarily the case.
Okay. Yeet the Rich says, support Bernie by supporting progressive media. Oh, thanks, that's very much. And that was a super chat from Yeet the Rich.
Yeet the Rich. Funny. Do you know what yeet means?
No.
It's like you chuck something. I think, right? Did I get that one right? It's one of.
I thought it was a play on eat.
I think it is. I think it's both those things. But it's one of those. Is it a Zoom? Is that a Zoomer slang? I don't know. Brianna and I are.
Someone tells me I'm like too old.
Brianna and I are decrepit old millennials. So yeah. Yes, certainly. I certainly think that one of the things Bernie's got going for him, guys, is progressive media, mostly online, places like YouTube. Whether it's myself, like, I mean, I don't want to throw myself in with those people. They're people way bigger. David Dole, Michael Brooks, Mike Figueredo, Crystal Ball, the Majority Report, the you know, all of these sources. There's so many great ones. I'm missing some. I'm sure, but they all do great work. And in terms of offering a counter narrative to the news, not just about Bernie, but just about progressive issues in general. This is work that is not being done elsewhere. It's not.
Okay, Dan Cordovan said, is a global general strike possible to seize the means of production?
I mean, I'm not sure.
No.
I don't think so. I don't think that's on the cards right now. I don't see the means of a general strike developing in a country like Canada right now. Now, in France, there's something of a mass strike. I don't know if you'd call it a general strike. I don't know. I'm not on the ground. But it doesn't seem to me like we're in a position right now that like at a global level, workers could see the means of seize the means of production through mass protest. I don't see that happening right now. There are too many divisions within and between countries for that to happen.
I don't know. There's lots of good commentary tonight.
Any particular?
What do you like? What are the odds that Singh is electable in Quebec?
I think, like, I don't know how Singh's gonna do.
What do you think of Singh's ability to like connect with like working people?
Okay, well, there's a few things there. Singh obviously, maybe in part because of his identity, doesn't have as easy a time coming off as one of the guys of like certain blue collar types or just working people. It also doesn't help that Jagmeet dresses up in very fancy suits and the guy is always styling, right? Like he looks great. It is who he is. I'm not saying like be fake, but like The guy has a certain GQ style. Maybe that makes it harder for him to appear as and seem identifiable to working people. But Jagmeet did really well with young people in the last election. And if you want to look at the people who are doing working class jobs, working minimum wage, working hard hours, they're disproportionately young people. Those are the people that are working the hardest for the least amount of money. Like the young people, millennials and Gen Z. Not everybody who works hard and long hours for low money is a millennial, but on average, our generation is poorer than the older generations, both now and relative to when those generations were our age. So, Jagmeet's reaching out to those people. In terms of his ability to to find success in Quebec, I'm torn because on the one hand, Jagmeet speaks very good French. He knows the language. He's made a real effort. When he was in Quebec, people actually really liked him. And I wonder if there was a lot of discrimination due to the turban, due to the religion, things like that. But I also wonder if the next election, they're going to be more open to him. And I wouldn't be surprised to see him regain some of those seats. The NDP lost, again, almost all their seats in Quebec, except for Bouleries. But some of the races were pretty close. And, if some of those candidates run again, and the polls are just a little bit better for the NDP, you could see Ruth Ellen Brosseau and Guy Dussault and some of these people come back. Or Jean-Luc Dussault. Guy Caron, I think, unfortunately, he lost his seat by quite a bit, unfortunately, but maybe he could come back too.
Okay, Brendan Lang says, have you heard anything about disability-related rights since Bill C-81?
I mean, not in particular. If you have a specific question, let me know, but I haven't heard anything in particular. I have to look into it, the legislation in particular. So let me know if there's something on that.
Okay. Yeah, let us know, and I'll try to read your question again.
You got a super chat right there.
Oh, we did. Mickey Calder. Calder. I'll leave. You're so mean. It's hard to read.
I know. I'm just.
Touch me. Okay. What is it?
The question?
No.
Calder.
Mickey Calder. Are you sure? Okay, Mickey Calder gave a super chat. Thank you so much for your support. He says, they say, might Matthew Green be the NDP's Bernie? I like Matthew. Matthew's
great. Matthew's been on my channel. We've done an interview. Matthew's been very supportive of me and this channel, and I'm very supportive of him. Matthew Green right now supports Jagmeet Singh. And he's right to do it. Jagmeet Singh's the leader of this party. And there's no reason to challenge Jagmeet's leadership right now. Jagmeet has the support of most of the party's membership and deserves it. That being said, I think Matthew Green is maybe the biggest rising star in the party. He's the best new MP in the parliament, and there's a lot of good new MPs, but he's the best one. And, look, hypothetically, if, Jagmeet is no longer leader, because I'm not playing these games, Jagmeet has my support. I like him. I really do. He grew on me over the election and over the run-up to the election. But I could 100% see Matthew Green being the leader of the party. I could. Should he? It's not a versus Jagmeet thing, but it's does he have the stuff to be a party leader? 100%. Ontario NDP, federal NDP, whatever he chooses, yeah, he could be a leader, and he could do a damn good job of it. And I think that his role is going to be as a crucial player in Jagmeet Singh's team. He's going to be vitally important. He's a rising star. And yes, he's bringing a distinct left-wing vision. Even on his first day at Parliament, a group of youth climate justice protesters were protesting in Parliament, on Parliament Hill, and were basically kicked out by security. And I believe it was him and Laurel Collins, the other new NDP MP, she's from out west, who actually went out and met with these people because they were planning to meet them in the House and they weren't allowed. So they left Parliament to go meet with them. That was his first day. He's also spoken out against the coup in Bolivia, before a lot of people did. He's a great MP. I'm excited to have him as part of the team.
Okay, another question from Joseph. He says, what do you think about Warren's emphasis on the fact that she and Klobuchar haven't lost elections like their male rivals? I think this is a losing argument, especially since you can learn from a loss.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe she was trying to be a little cutesy, where she was like, because apparently, and again, you guys saw my videos. In fact, it was around that time that the channel started really picking up steam. So some of you may have first found me when I was making those Bernie Warren videos. And my argument all along was Bernie didn't say that. Maybe she misinterpreted him. Bernie likely said that, hey, look, Trump will use whatever he can against whoever he can to get whatever he can. And that will include your gender identity. And it would include Bernie's ethno-religious identity and things like that. But beyond that, I think her point was, oh, look, somebody thinks that women can't win, but actually the two women on the stage are the only undefeated people. I don't know if that's really an argument to be made. I mean, hypothetically, you could say that, but Warren has to be careful because Warren underperformed, I think, her last Senate election. She underperformed Hillary Clinton, I think. And I think she underperformed relative to what Democratic senatorial candidates get in states like Massachusetts. So I think that the argument doesn't really hold all that well for her. It's just, she's from a very blue state. Bernie, and she beat a Republican, I think, but it's a technical thing. Bernie Sanders' argument is much more compelling. Bernie Sanders won a mayoral seat as an independent. He won a Congress seat as an independent. He won a senatorial seat as an independent. Bernie Sanders did lose elections, but Bernie Sanders hasn't lost an election since the 70s or early. He's been mostly undefeated for his career, except for a couple early losses. And remember when Warren cheekily tried to say no one in the last 30 years has flipped a Republican seat like I have? Well, Bernie Sanders flipped a Republican seat about 29 years and 2 months ago. And a much longer, more established Republican seat than Warren, which was typically and more defaultly, if that's a word, a Democratic seat anyway. Bernie Sanders, I don't want to say single-handedly, but Bernie Sanders played a role in creating a blue state, creating an entirely new blue state. Warren just took up a seat in one of the bluest states in the country. It's a totally different game.
Okay, Kevin Brown, question. To your knowledge, is there any historical precedent for the BC and DP agreeing to not run a candidate in a riding in exchange for some other concession to avoid a vote split?
I don't know if that's ever happened. To my knowledge, it hasn't. In Canada, we don't really do that sort of thing. Like in Canada, there's not a lot of pre-election cooperation between parties. There's not like we're going to do a joint nomination. Because some countries do that where it's like, okay, so there's two left-wing parties. We're going to have a joint nomination between the members of those two parties in this riding. The winner will be the only one that runs, and the other party will endorse that person. Or in some places, you'll do something like, okay, we won't run here, and then you won't run there. Ergo, we won't split each other's votes, and hopefully we can win both seats. That doesn't really happen all that often in Canada. I mean, hypothetically, could that happen?
You wouldn't know if it happened, really.
Well, you would know if they agreed not to run somebody, because the NDP runs people in almost every riding all the time. So if we didn't run somebody in a riding, often the reason is somebody drops out because of scandal. We had a candidate.
But it's fair to say that you wouldn't know because those are backroom deals.
You might not know 100%, but it's not been something, and it's not been something that we've heard about. And,
no, it's not widespread, but it could happen.
And we're not big shots or anything, but we if something like that happened, we'd likely hear through the grapevine. And so that I don't know. In Canada, electoral cooperation is more during elections or in between elections, where it's like, hey, we'll uphold your government if you give us this policy, which is basically what the BC NDP and BC Greens are doing right now. And it's worked. Like, they've done some, they're not as environmentalist as some Greens would like, and they're not as left-wing as some NDPers would like, but the government's proved the cooperation can work. They could last the full term, maybe.
Okay, Alvin Careless says, get another mic. No Matters says, need an invisible mic. PB Hello says, what's the difference between a caucus and a ranked choice in terms of outcome?
Well, the ranked choice would be more automatic, and it would likely include your ability to rank more people. So, for instance, let's say in this democratic process, there's like, say, I don't know how many people would technically be on the ballot. Say 10 people. You could go down your list and rank all 10 people. And right? And then like what would happen is in your precinct or whatever, you would keep going until the one person in your precinct got over half the vote. Or at the statewide level, what would happen is on the first ballot, the leading candidate has 31%. You knock the lowest person off, you redistribute their votes, and then after that, you add them all up again. And then when one person gets to 50% plus one, they've won the election. That's how it works. Or when all the people are eliminated and there's just one person left, if they're below 50, which is possible with spoiled ballots and things like that. The caucuses don't quite have that. The way the caucuses worked was if you go in and you sit with your people in like designated areas, and you're counted. If you don't add up to 15%, then you have the opportunity to make one more choice, to go to one candidate that did make 15%. But you don't get to move to another person if you finished with 15%. You don't get to make your second choice. You know what I mean? So it's not quite a ranked ballot. It's more like first round of voting. Eliminate all the non-viable candidates. Let them choose again those people's delegates, those people's supporters. So it's not quite a ranked ballot. Whereas a ranked ballot would be, everyone would just redistribute until one person could add up their support to reach 50% plus one.
Okay, Alibi wants to know, where can they find Canadian legislature videos? I think they mean maybe like CPAC.
Yeah, exactly. CPAC, is CPAC, would be a place to go check. They generally run all of the House of Commons stuff and some of the committees. I don't know if they have like archives. There's also like a TV. They have a TV channel if you have like cable, like it's on TV, but you can also go to their website. There's also the Ontario Legislative Assembly. Most of the provinces, I believe, run the same thing at their on local TV, and so you can do it for the provincial level as well. You can see that. Often things like question period or very big events will also just be run on the news. Like if you watch the CBC news channel, I think they run question period, but that's run probably live on CPAC. That's probably where I would check.
I think so. All My Lettuce says, can you send us a link to the interview with Matthew Green?
Yeah, let me just, I'll bring it up right here. It should be easy to find on the channel, but let me just.
Okay. You're going to take a question while you do this?
Yeah.
Okay. Digital Rain says, what's your take on the BDS debate at the 2008 Policy Convention? Why were some prominent New Democrats seemingly so unsympathetic towards the adoption of a robust BDS resolution?
I mean, I don't know about the 2008 convention. Do you mean 2018?
Oh, shoot. That was me.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
2018. Sorry.
And I just dropped the link in the chat there, guys. That's the link to the Matthew Green. Again, excuse the quality. Matthew was busy campaigning, so he was in his car, and I didn't have my nice setup yet, but it was a great chat. It was fantastic chat. And that was before he was officially an MP, but when he was running during the election. Look, the basically... What?
Yeah, that's Smokey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was he back? Was he?
No. Dan said you hear him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So basically, the party's position is divided in the membership. I would say a lot of the membership supports BDS. I support it. Obviously, I don't agree with every individual case. I think the devil can be in the details about what do you control under BDS? Do you control individual actors? For instance, do you control individual scholars from Israeli universities? I don't know if I agree with that, but say, do you boycott certain products from Israel? I would agree with that. Do I think Israel should be allowed to participate at the Olympics? I would say no. I think they should be forced out of the Olympics like South Africa. They're an apartheid state. That's my view. But not everyone agrees. And a lot of people feel that Israel is not the bad guy, that Israel is a victim of aggression from its neighbors, and that it's defending itself, or that there is no good guy or no bad guy here, and it's a lot grayer than people suspect. A lot of people will suggest in the party, that BDS is bad because we are singling out Israel. That there are lots of countries doing bad things around the world, and yet only Israel is held to this standard, and because of that, it is I don't know if this word, I don't say it because I don't want to get demonetized, but the word that people will throw around when you're systematically discriminatory against Jewish people. And so, that's one of the arguments, right? I don't necessarily agree, but that's basically the point. And then there are Zionists in the NDP. There are people who believe in the Zionist project. Right? Whether you think the Zionism is good because it's the expression of the Jewish homeland, or whether you think it's a settler colonial project and has the same kind of fundamental flaws that Canada, Australia, New Zealand, United States have as settler colonial projects. I mean, that's where the debate lies. So the party's torn on it. But I think in general, where I will criticize the party is that there's a clear effort to silence debate on this issue. And that's where it's unacceptable. It's one thing for Jagmeet to go out and say he doesn't agree with BDS. I think he's wrong, frankly. But it's quite another for at conventions, it make it almost impossible for us to have a meaningful debate about Israel and its role as an apartheid state.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I think this is probably the last time, or the first time, that we're not going to get through all of the questions.
Okay.
So Zachary says, do you think it matters that Canada is trying for a seat on the UN Security Council?
Not really. I mean, maybe it matters to Trudeau, part of his narratives. One of the arguments was oh, Harper was bad for our international image, so Trudeau's going to rehabilitate that and we're going to get on the Security Council. I'm not sure. I'm sure that it matters for some people, and that media that's friendly to the Liberal Party will buff it up and say this is a great example of Justin Trudeau's international image, and then media that's not will either dismiss it or somehow say it's a bad thing, that he's kowtowing to the evil UN. I don't think it matters all that much. We still have more questions?
A couple comments.
Okay.
Loyal Sub says, I just joined the New Dems because of John Horgan, but I'll hit my head against the wall if BC New Democrats keep trying to screw teachers.
Yeah, look, they should just basically give the teachers what they want, or at least mostly. Look, you got to bargain. Even a left-leaning government doesn't always have to give workers everything they demand. That's just the nature of bargaining. But they should not be trying to raise class sizes and do that sorts of stuff. BC, one, the teachers play a fundamental role in making the province what it is. Two, under naked politics, the BC teachers probably did a lot of volunteer work for the BC NDP in that election. And I'm not saying they're owed quid pro quo or anything. But look, these people helped elect you. You should keep that in mind. I think another factor has to be known is that, the BC's got a massive surplus. The BC government has bragged about it. They got money coming out the wazoo relative to most provinces. And that's a good thing. That's a sign that the government's doing a good job. So the teachers don't want to take lower standards or they want a slight increase, I think you can afford it. So yeah, how they're treating the BC teachers, I don't agree with right now. I don't.
Okay, and we have a super chat from Sean Andernach getting in right under the wire. They say, would you say most PMs and premiers since the 50s have been neoliberal? Any notable neocons, social dems, etc. to get power?
Well, see, neoliberalism didn't really exist in the 50s, right? Like in the 50s, that was still during the era of the expanding welfare state. And so they were all liberals, like small L liberals, but neoliberalism didn't really exist. Like Richard Nixon would say, we're all Keynesians. Like Richard Nixon wasn't even really a neoliberal. The first neoliberal president was likely Ronald Reagan or maybe Jimmy Carter in the start of it. Much like how Canada's first neoliberal prime minister was either Brian Mulroney or, I would argue, and I argue in my book on Pierre Trudeau, that the intellectual seeds of neoliberalism in Canada start to sprout under Mulroney, but they're planted by Trudeau. And so neoliberalism doesn't really start till the late 70s, early 80s. But you're right in noting that they're almost always liberals in terms of social I would suggest that they're all probably neoliberals. I mean, Stephen Harper was something of a social conservative, but the way he governed as a rather traditional neoliberal. He didn't really push for hard right policies on social issues. He focused on tax cuts. He focused on those sorts of things. On traditional neoliberal austerity. His government was much more like Jean Chrétien's than it was like a right-wing Alberta social conservative government. I would agree. And there hasn't been a social democratic prime minister of Canada. I mean, the closest you would get is the Pearson years. Lester Pearson was definitely a liberal, but it was during that era where Canadians were more willing to invest in social programs, and he was dependent upon Tommy Douglas and the NDP for support. And as a result, that's where Medicare happened, but not just Medicare. I think that's where the CPP comes from. That's where like federal student loans come from. The 5 Pearson years were a massive success for the expansion of the welfare state in Canada.
Okay, we'll do one more question.
Okay.
Pick a good one.
So guys, one of the challenges with growing as a channel is that when we used to have 30, 40, 50 people, we could read all the questions. So we do our very best to get through them all, but we might not be able to do that every single time now, especially when I ramble on and on. So I'm going to try to be more concise, and we're going to try to still, when we do these, get as many questions. So Brianna will read one more.
Okay. This is from Tim Kennelly. Should all the states hold their primaries on the same day?
I made a comment on Twitter suggesting that, sort of just musing. But then a lot of people brought up really good points about why that might be a bad thing. One, having a longer process allows people more time to get to know the candidate and who they are and what policies they'll offer. I still think the process is too long, but the argument that it should all be on one day maybe limits that ability. Another argument I've heard is that it makes it harder for lesser known candidates to have a chance. Because if it's all happening on one day, the bigger candidate can sort of just brute force the process. So Bernie Sanders maybe doesn't become the figure he is if all the primaries are just held on one day. Because Bernie Sanders built up momentum and built up energy over the long primary. And he didn't win Iowa, but he just finished behind Clinton. It was basically a tie. And then he won New Hampshire. And then he had like a whole bunch of little victories here and there. And of course, Hillary Clinton won, partially because the system was rigged for her, but also she did get more support than Bernie. She did. But like that whole long process allowed Bernie Sanders to build this national movement. And that's not necessarily possible for lesser known candidates if it all happens in one day. Barack Obama maybe doesn't happen if the primaries aren't staggered. Another argument is that because of the If you had them all on one day, it would make the power of big donors and big money candidates that much more important, because you would need to spend much more money on national ads, and you need to have more volunteers and more paid staff than you do even now to run it all on one day, because you need to have people in all 50 states. You would effectively have to run the general election style campaign twice, one for the nomination and then one for the actual presidency, which would cost way more money. So whether or not the way they do it now is the best way, I think that having some kind of staggering is maybe for the best. Maybe it's a good idea.
Okay.
So, guys, this was fantastic. Again, it was a really great, 2.5 hours or so chatting. Just as a couple reminders, again, we'd love to get to as many questions as we can. We're going to continue to try to do that. I love being able to talk with you guys directly. As the stream grows, it'll be a little bit more challenging. But if you have a question that you feel is timely for next week, save it. And if you ask it soon enough, we'll be sure to get it. Thanks, everyone, for all your support here. We do this every Wednesday night, 8 p.m. Eastern. Usually go from about 8 to 10:30, sometimes 11, but that's where we go to. For those who are new, I post videos on the channel every day, pretty much every day, sometimes multiple times a day, and so you'll always find my content there. And other than that, I occasionally do some other streams, but I'll let you know about those. So sometimes I live stream debates and election results and things like that, but not always. So guys, this was really great. I want to thank you for coming. Thank you for your support, and I will see you on my videos, and I will see you next Wednesday at the very latest.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.